These are facts. You can't just, hide that or deny it or not talk about it because there is a danger of.
I didn't say don't talk about statistics. I said don't say all Muslims hate the Jews. Don't say all Muslims do this. We can't say Muslim immigrants believe this, Muslim immigrants believe that.
We had this whole idea of creating a multicultural society and integrate people, and we worked on it, but it is a failed project. It is a complete failure, she said, and she was asking how to fix the situation. So I feel like it's not very pragmatic to rule out these options.
So I would first say,
I wanted to point something out to Dylan. Like, you're right about this.
Welcome to SuperNova. This week's topic, we are going to be talking about both the Israel Palestine conflict as well as the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and kind of like going through and seeing similarities, seeing how these two things relate, etc. We'll start it off with our first opening question, and I guess before we get into it, just if everybody wants to give a quick intro for who they are, we'll start from top left with Ridvan. So
I'm top left.
For me, you are. Yeah, sorry.
Authoritarian left.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So I'm Ridvan. I'm a YouTuber, ApostateProphet. I do mostly stuff on Islam and being an ex-Muslim. And that's it.
Okay, Dylan.
Hi, my name's Dylan Burns. I'm a professional war tourist. That'll be it.
Awesome. Kraut.
Hey, I'm Kraut. I'm a cat. Meow, meow. Yeah. I just woke up.
Wow.
I'm very confused.
Wow.
Okay.
All right. LonerBox.
Hey, I'm LonerBox. I'm a jihadi Zionist, according to my critics.
Okay.
I
Rav.
Hi, I'm Ravignon. I made a documentary series on Quebec. That's like my signature thing. So yeah.
Okay. And then last but not least, Twisted Aviator.
He's taking a
Twisted,
shit.
you're muted.
Yeah, his mic's off.
Twisted Aviator. I'm a retired Marine Harrier driver and a bit of a student of geopolitics. So this is kind of my thing that I really get into.
All right, awesome. Thank you all for joining us. Eris kind of gave me a maybe, so but I don't think she's able to show up. So, but let's get into the first topic. So, first question: recent events regarding Israel Palestine and regarding the response to the October 7th massacre have brought the immigration debate back up into public attention in Europe. Even left-leaning politicians are now openly talking about mass deportations and deporting non-citizens who express anti-Semitic views. French politicians are even considering laws that revoke the citizenship of second-generation migrants who support Hamas. Is this okay, or is this a dangerous overreaction? We'll, I guess, just do opening statements. Rav, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first.
Okay.
Okay. I guess that to the extent that we can discuss, the fact that anti-Semitism has been displayed, I would say, if you've ever been in a situation where you have to organize a protest, for example, if you've ever been a marshal or someone who is in the position where you're directing a protest, you'll know that controlling the general display of what people say and what people do is something that is incredibly difficult. And, in all protests, there have been particularly vulgar expressions of what people do and what people say. I remember, for example, when Obama was president, we saw, very racist displays against black people whenever he won. When Bernie Sanders won the Iowa caucus, there were also very blatant displays of anti-Semitism from among Americans who weren't necessarily, in favor of him winning, that kind of thing. whenever I see, the worst displays of anti-Semitism that I've seen in Europe, for example, in France, I tend to look at it in that kind of regard, as particularly vulgar expressions of people who are doing things to upset Jews in like the worst way possible in order to get under their skin as much as they can. And yeah, I mean, it's terrible, it's offensive. I think that in Europe we have a historic responsibility of not letting this kind of thing happen because we already let it get very bad once. But deportation is a little extreme, and it's something that I wouldn't levy against, our own citizens in Europe, right? Like, I wouldn't support deporting supporters of Hamas who were citizens. Removing citizenship is a bit extreme in whatever circumstance you want to argue for it. It's typically something I would not like to see. But I understand that, Hamas is still a terrorist organization. They're a security risk for, the physical safety of a lot of people. So in that sense, I'm not really sure what kind of measure would be appropriate. But I think deportation is a bit extreme. What I would like to see is something that, respects the human rights of the people involved. At the same time that, we countermeasure Hamas effectively and we render them unable to do the kind of atrocities that they have perpetrated in the last 3 weeks now. Yeah.
A quick comment. Your mic is crackling a little bit, so you might want to like maybe adjust something there.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Is this better?
We'll have to see, I guess. Next up, let's go to Twisted Aviator. Twisted, you're muted. 1 second.
All right. Problem is, with the deportation thing, do I think that the people who support Hamas should be extremely heavily vetted? Absolutely. Should second generation people be deported just because they have connections? Absolutely not. It does become important in these situations to vet everybody properly and make sure that they are not actively providing support to a terrorist organization. Which, in my opinion, Hamas is a terrorist organization, independent of the Palestine people. But I'm not in favor of deportations. That goes a bit extreme. Blocking fresh immigrants that support Hamas during this time of conflict, I could probably get behind that. But not deporting those that are already in the country legally and citizens. So, yeah.
Okay. Next up, LonerBox.
I think there are a lot of people who deserve to lose their YouTube channels based on their behavior for the last month. Citizenship? No, I'm a bit more free speech than that. I think when I think of paradox of tolerance, I tend to think it should apply more to actions rather than speech. I think if people are running around drawing Stars of David on Jewish houses or like Molotov cocktailing people's doors and shit like that, then you can probably consider quite extreme repercussions. Not just for vocal support, no.
Okay, Kraut.
Might be going on a bit longer here. So LonerBox mentioned the drawing Stars of David on people's homes. We don't know yet who did it in Berlin. There's a massive police investigation going on. The people who did that are being hunted down. One thing I think I should inform people of that I think a lot of people don't know yet is the people who did it in France, in Paris, who went from house to house in Jewish communities and marked the homes of Jewish people with Stars of David, were actually caught and arrested. And they were not Muslim immigrants. And this gets really fascinating. They were Russian operatives who actually confessed and showed that they had orders from Russian intelligence officers to do that. So probably incited to, given orders basically from Russia to try to incite social instability in Paris. I think that is worth pointing out. So it also points out to sorry, I'm waking up still. How important it is to carefully investigate everything that is going on. I think that is very necessary. So, deporting someone, revoking someone's citizenship even, these are very extreme methods. I don't think you can revoke the citizenship of someone who doesn't have any other citizenship. I think you can only revoke citizenship of someone, or should only be able to revoke citizenship of a person if they have double citizenship. And if you are going to take an extreme measure as that in a European state, you usually should have really good evidence based to justify such a decision. In other countries, it's different. Switzerland has a very unique immigration system, for example. In Switzerland, they don't have a federal immigration system because it's a confederacy where the states have more powers than the federal government. And what the immigration system, how it works there is basically your neighbors get to decide if you can stay. If you move to a community as a foreigner in Switzerland, you apply for Swiss citizenship, you go for an 8-year period where you have to prove to your neighbors that you're worthy of being Swiss, and your neighbors, your community, can literally call a referendum on if you can stay. There was a famous, funny incident a few years ago where a French actress millionaire moved to a small town outside of Geneva. She's also a vegan, and she annoyed her neighbors so much with her vegan activism that they called a referendum and they voted to have her deported back to France. So, different system in Switzerland. If you behave in a stupid way in Switzerland and your neighbors decide you're no longer worthy of being Switzerland, that's on you. Your neighbors can vote to kick you out, basically. But when it comes to this, there's something that happened yesterday that really radicalized me on this position, which is there was a march. I want to reiterate, not everyone who waves a Palestine flag is a foreigner. Not everyone who waves a Palestine flag is a migrant. Not everyone who waves a Hamas flag is probably a foreigner or a migrant. Most of them are probably, especially, a lot of these people are probably rather stupid if you wave a Hamas flag, and not just foreign, right? It's more of an indicator that you're stupid than foreign. But something that happened yesterday in the German city of Essen was there was a march of 3,000 people waving Taliban flags, organized by an organization called Hizb ut-Tahrir. This is an organization that is illegal in Germany because it is an organization that has raised funds and given funds and supported organizations like the fucking Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. I mean, if you have I think that if you do something like that, and this is an organization illegal in Germany, banned by the law, and I seriously believe that everyone who attended that rally in particular, it should be questioned if they should be in this country. I have to be very frank about that. Because they were screaming, kill all Jews. They declared a caliphate and proclaimed how they would behead everyone who's gay once they're in power. I've read report that they assaulted women who were not veiled on their march. So people like that, I don't think they should be here. I really don't think that they should be here. But it's a very specific type of person who I think deserves to be deported. And it's really just the open jihadi sympathizer, or someone who breaks the hate speech laws of the country, someone who denies the Holocaust, someone who does shit like that. I think and it has to be proven that they do shit like that. And if you can prove that they do shit like that, yes, they should be open for deportation from European countries.
Okay. By the way, Kraut, do you mind dropping the link for the Russian operants you said that were responsible for it? Dylan.
So I'm just going to back up Kraut a little bit on the Russian operative story. There was a separate story being reported in Moldova about a separate incident where Stars of Davids were being painted on homes. And then when the couple was caught, they said that they were paid by somebody in Russia. They were paid by Russian operatives. Now, they could just be saying that to get out of it, as in just like, actually, Putin made me anti-Semitic. It wasn't me. Like, we don't know until there's a full investigation. But it wouldn't be that far out of Russia's like intelligence preview to try to cause discontent within Western societies through any means possible to try to break apart support for the war. We know that the Russians want to do this, but we just don't know. We just don't have all the evidence about these cases yet until an investigation is completed. What was that,
If
Kraut?
I can get into if I can into the for Dylan, they did this before. We know, for example, that at least 2 or 3 anti-Zelensky protests in Europe were actually organized by Russian agents.
They used to do it with Black Lives Matter and anti-Black Lives Matter protests as well. They would organize both sides of a protest just to cause ruckus. It's very strange. But putting all that aside, my first concern when we start talking about, especially talking about deporting second generation immigrants, is creating stateless people, where we deport somebody who has no familiarity with their home, has no idea like where what it's like in Bangladesh or what it's like in Myanmar or wherever they could be from. We end up sending them back there. Their government might not want them, especially if they're a sympathizer with terrorist organizations. And then we've created a stateless person. And that's something that would be a concern to me. But if somebody is doing like what Kraut described, fundraising for terrorist organizations, assaulting women for not being veiled, or involved in any type of activity for that, if not deportation, they should come with prison sentences and punitive punishment in society to discourage that behavior and stop that behavior at the root. I also believe that any type of organization that's fundraising for terror groups, I hope they do some Fed activities. I hope they infiltrate these organizations. I hope they have eyes in these organizations. And I hope some of the second generation immigrants that make our societies much better help us infiltrate these organizations, because I assume somebody from Bangladesh is going to be much better at infiltrating a organization based in Bangladesh or from Bangladesh than if I was to go in there and say, Salam alaikum, my name's Dylan, I want to join terrorism. That's not going to work well. Point is, though, I'm concerned about creating stateless people, and I'm an American, and I know this is full of a lot more Europeans in here, but as an American, and it's different standards for Europe, because America, I think, is known for its ability to assimilate people. I feel very bad about the idea of giving up on that assimilation process, which I've seen a lot of people start to do online, saying you cannot assimilate people from these countries. It's impossible. You can't do it. This is all going to destroy our societies, yada, yada, yada. I don't believe that. Now, I'm an American, so I can say from our frame of reference that we have been able to have a group of Muslims in the United States on average that are more progressive than some of our more Christian denominations, like the evangelicals, who have been here in large part longer than Muslim Americans who have immigrated mostly more recently. So it's not like it's impossible. If somebody tells me it's impossible, I don't think it's impossible, but there still could be a difference between American and European culture that could make it more difficult to go through the assimilation process. That's all I have to say.
Okay, last but not least, Ridvan.
Well, I think it depends very much
Or
on
do you
on
prefer me to call you AP or?
Yeah,
Sorry.
just say AP. That's easier.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
I like that.
Okay.
Depends on what we're talking about, what country we're talking about. I mean, there is one thing to consider, which is that Hamas is recognized as a terrorist organization throughout the Western world, right? Throughout most of the Western world, Hamas is considered a terrorist organization. The same goes for many of these other organizations, which people often come out in support for with their flags and all of that. For many of these protests that we experienced, we have seen, just a second. This is interesting. No, I just noticed that there's no audio on my own stream. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, with many of these protests, we have seen that that people go with flags of Hamas, that people go with flags of ISIS, of the Taliban, with black flags that have the Shahada on them, which are like which are representative of certain jihadist organizations or of jihad altogether. Like, for example, the black flag with the Shahada on it is known as the jihadist flag, and its implications are usually that there should be a global caliphate established, that people should be fighting for this caliphate, that people should be pledging allegiance to this caliphate. I think given the situation, given the fact that Hamas is recognized as a terrorist organization, given the fact that many of these organizations that these flags and these slogans are associated with are considered terrorist organizations, or the very countries that these people live in are in one way or another at conflict with those groups, I would say it's not entirely unreasonable to take further steps in order to, deport some of them, or if it's possible, I guess, or to have otherwise, different repercussions against them. I will leave it at that right now. I'm completely confused because on the one hand, I'm trying to figure out my technical issue here. On the other hand, I'm trying to think this through.
Yeah, no,
But
no,
how
no problem.
about I leave it at that and I'll get right back to
Yeah.
you.
You might have to add like audio sources and OBS.
Yeah.
So we'll open up the panel then, I guess, to whatever you guys want to discuss regarding this topic.
Sure. There's
one thing I want to say. I don't know. I'm not overly familiar with European laws. When I say no deportations, I'm taking that from an American standpoint of you're already a citizen, you don't get deported, right? If you're a citizen. Now, if you're breaking the laws of your host country that you're now a citizen of, whether that's in Europe, the hate speech laws, whatnot, we don't have that here, then you should do prison time or jail time based on those laws that you're broken. But second generation deportations, no, absolutely not. It's just that. I live a little bit extreme. Now you definitely want to vet all these people, like I said.
If I could just give an update on like the hate speech thing. I live in one of the European countries now with one of the strictest hate speech laws. I live in Austria. To give you an idea of how strict they are here, like spreading Nazi propaganda is a 17-year prison sentence. 17 years. Denying the Holocaust is a 12-year prison sentence here. It's
mandatory?
Really strict. Yes. 12 years if you deny the Holocaust. That's the prison sentence here. So I made a video series when I moved here debunking Holocaust deniers, and I was actually called by an Austrian lawyer who told me you should not do that because even just playing the clips of someone denying the Holocaust and just sort of debunking them might make you legally liable. So it's a really strict thing in some countries. In Germany, I think the prison terms is 6 years for denying the Holocaust. In Poland, in Czechia, it's not only a crime to deny the Holocaust, it's also a crime to deny the Holodomor or the Soviet gulags. In France, it's also a crime to deny the Armenian genocide. So most countries in Europe have these laws. But there is this funny thing which has happened over the last few years, which is, like, just theoretically speaking, if you go to a protest rally in Germany and you scream, gas the Jews, death to the Jews, or if you go on social media and you live in Germany and you post Holocaust denial, usually you get arrested. That's just, the police will investigate you. If someone reports you, you will get arrested. You will get prosecuted. And there was a funny thing that happened, in particular in Germany, throughout the last 10 years, 20 years actually, which is, if you happen to be a Muslim and you did these things, you were somehow exempt from the laws. There is video footage of Islamist rallies taking place in 2012, in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, where they scream these things and the police just stands by and does nothing. And that annoyed me. Like, I have to be honest with you, I don't like hate speech laws. I don't think we should have them. I disagree with these strict laws that we have. But if you're going to have a law, you should enforce it on everyone, independent of who they are. It doesn't matter what their background is, it doesn't matter how old they are, what ethnicity they are, what beliefs they have, if they have an immigration background or not. The law should be enforced on everyone. And what happened in Europe, what I think a lot of people don't realize, and what is a real big shock to the system, is that this invisible barrier that prevented Islamists from being arrested fell. It's gone. When people organized these rallies 3-4 weeks ago, where they screamed these things that are illegal, they suddenly were arrested. Something broke 3-4 weeks ago where that barrier went gone. And that's the reason why they whine and cry so much on social media about it, because they lost this privilege of being exempt from the law. And that's really, I think it is important to point that out.
Dylan, go ahead. What you were trying to get in as well? Sorry.
Yeah, but I think it's completely past my mind now.
Oh no!
Yeah,
I'm
come
sorry.
back to me.
Okay, all right. Who else wants to weigh in on this?
Oh wait,
I
I brought it
think-
back. I got it back
Okay, go ahead.
before I lose it. I have a fear. When definitely when talking about deporting second generation immigrants, I have a fear that a lot of these pieces of legislation, which are meant in order to combat extremism, could end up just reinforcing extremism. One of the worst part, and this is an issue in the United States as well, even though I think generally we're pretty good on average when it comes to the issue of assimilating immigrants. In the United States, there is an issue, and just like there is in many places, where communities get very isolated, where immigrants tend to settle where other immigrants of a similar culture are. They get very insular, and when they become insular, that being so insular makes big divides with the rest of the community, the rest of the state, the rest of the county, etc. And I have a fear that if we start saying, you know what, if a second generation immigrant says, you know, glory to Hamas, or says some terrible thing like that, they could get deported. While if some person whose family immigrated here in 1772 came out and said Hail Hitler, well, no, he's still an American citizen. He still has all the same rights as every other American citizen. He can still be here, and that's covered by the First Amendment. But it's very different when it comes to this person because their family is from another country. If we're going to be applying the standard to second generation immigrants, then we'd also have to apply it to our domestically bred neo-Nazi problem as well. We'd have to apply it to the other types of extremism as well. And then we're just creating a bunch of stateless extremists, which I don't know if that's the best solution to the problem.
Yeah, I agree with Dylan. There's something that, you know, you could argue that in the case of many European countries, we have this thing where, you know, we have this historic responsibility towards anti-Semitism and a lot of things. Could
you raise your voice a bit? It's kind of hard to hear you.
Yeah, you're very quiet.
Yeah, you've gotten a little bit quiet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, in the case of Europe, right, we can discuss that we have a lot of historic responsibilities towards anti-Semitism and you know, that prejudice in particular. But if we are going to take, you know, acting against any sort of like illiberal sentiment seriously, we would have to go against, you know, neo-Nazis in our own societies and anti-feminists in our own societies, and, you know, the banning of books would include the banning of like,
a curd is a curd.
There's like this
Flemmy has donated $6.
saying, you know,
Dylan, could you please remove the word "to"? Generation immigrant. Once you are born with citizenship, you are not an immigrant, so the phrase is totally misleading.
How much are we going to allow advocacy of
There are people currently serving long prison terms in both Germany and in Austria for doing neo-Nazi stuff.
Yeah, I also want to point out that I think it's not the same thing. I would say it's not necessarily the same thing. I mean, in the West, it's very much the whole neo-Nazi issue, I would say, is largely under control, and it's a very fringe idea, a very fringe movement. Very small groups of people, very small numbers of people tend to become neo-Nazis and, you know, hold these very extreme positions. Comparatively, when it comes to those demographics from which people who support Hamas, for example, emerge, or, you know, people who say gas to Jews and Allahu Akbar and this and that, and who chant all of these Islamic slogans, this is not just a minority in those demographics. I mean, to be specific, let's be just very honest about it. Among Muslims, this is not a very small number. It's actually a very high number, and you could say that that it's probably a majority that believes in really abhorrent things. And if they choose to be outspoken about them, and if they choose to hold extreme positions and advocate for the removal and the destruction and the mistreatment of Jews, for example, in the name of the religion, that should be taken seriously, and I think it shouldn't be approached the same way we approach Nazis.
I disagree with you. I don't think that it's a majority of people in the Muslim community who believe these things. I think it is a minority in them as well. I don't think that every Moroccan, Tunisian, Algerian, or whatever who comes here to hold hateful views. I think, especially the Syrians who fled the gas bombs of Assad, I don't think that you will find these views represented in a large part of the Syrian community, to be honest. But
I would say we have very good evidence to say that. So this is, first off, an Islamic belief that is very common and that is also believed in by the majority of Muslims, by the majority of Sunni Muslims. And Sunni Muslims make up around 85 to 90% of the Muslim population. They believe that that they will, in the future, before the hour comes, fight and kill all the Jews. It sounds horrible. It sounds really bad, but this is a fact. This is Sunni Islam. It is a report, a prophecy by Muhammad, and they are supposed to believe that this will definitely happen, which is also why you can find that prophecy, for example, in the Hamas charter originally, and even the Palestinian Authority, which is supposed to be the reasonable, the peaceful side. Just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, they instructed the Religious Affairs Ministry instructed mosques to tell people that the hour will come when they will finally go out and kill the Jews. I know this might sound very surprising, but this actually just happened just a few weeks ago in the Palestinian territories.
Well, we are also talking about immigrants in Europe who left Muslim majority countries to live in liberal democracies. So I don't really know if they're going to carry like every crazy thing of their faith with them, you know. As for the free speech thing, I mean, I don't know about the German enforcement of their laws, but I do know that with these Palestinian protests, like things have gotten really, really extreme in the clampdown. I think the conservative Home Secretary was telling police officers that even waving a Palestinian flag might be a criminal offense. I know that there's been in Berlin, I think the educational authorities were considering a ban on anyone wearing the keffiyeh, even though that doesn't necessarily mean like pro-violence, or the like even just like Palestine stickers. So
yeah, that was done, by the way, because they deliberately went to the Jewish schools in Berlin to wave Palestinian flags in front of them and to harass Jewish students.
I understand that the harassment is one thing, isn't it?
Flags. Might be an overreaction, but that's why they did it.
I would say
I'm
that's
just telling you, don't leave that context out. Don't leave that context out. That's an important context, especially in relation to Germany and its Jews.
Yeah, I also want to say, LonerBox, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I actually lived as a second-generation immigrant in Germany from a Turkish background, and so I experienced the Turkish community, the Turkish Muslim community, and also other Muslim communities in Germany. And of course, this is completely anecdotal. I cannot give you research on this, but I can say for a fact that when 9/11, for example, happened, all the people that I knew, they either celebrated it or justified it or something else. And most of the people that I knew had extremely severely anti-Semitic views. And we learned that, you know, the future will come and this thing will happen. Jews are very much disliked across the Muslim world, especially in the Middle East. And even people who go to Europe, who are very different from immigrants who come to America, these thoughts, that way of thinking is very much preserved, and I think it should not be underestimated. That's the mistake that has been done over decades.
I wanted to point out to you.
I would agree with that, because in my opinion, a lot of the immigrants that are coming into Europe are just those people who have the means to immigrate. So it's not that they want to, quote unquote, live in a liberal democracy, so they're fleeing to do so. They have the money to go. It's not a fact of, oh, I don't believe in all this stuff, so I'm going to go to a democracy. No, I have the money. I'm going to go somewhere else. It's a better life.
Maybe there's polling that goes against this, but I would just imagine that if you were a Muslim who is willing to live in the UK, where you know you're going to see people who are drunk, where you're going to be around a lot of like sex before marriage and all that shit, I'm imagining then that the financial reasons to move are probably more important to you than living around a place where you're valued.
They want to impose their beliefs on the country that they're immigrating to.
So Muslims who immigrate from the Middle East to Europe are coming to change, to convert, or to like change the fucking ideological landscape of Europe
to an extent.
I would say
I
would say there was some nuance to it, but I would say that they are not necessarily coming just to do that. Many of them are coming because life is just better in the West. and they hold on to their values and hold on to rooting for their home countries and the values that they have over there, while coming to the West, living a better life, but still, and even you could even say to certain degrees, to an even more extreme way, waving the flag of being a Muslim and of having Islamic values because of some added nostalgia or whatever it is, which they then have after they come to Europe and live in this infidel land, I would say. So.
There's 2 points I wanted to make. There's 2 points I wanted to make, Viveka. So, AP, so you lived here for a while. Seren Atis, have you heard of Seren Atis? She's that woman imam, the pro-LGBT one.
Oh yeah, the one who created that mosque, right?
Yeah. The one of the few imams who does LGBT weddings. Yeah. She's under police protection. She's under protective custody right now.
I heard.
Because when the attacks happened, she condemned anti-Semitism, and that's something that has been very underreported, which kind of annoys me, because I think it is an important factor to keep in mind here. Those in the Muslim community who, in the last 4 weeks, especially those in Germany at least, who came forward to condemn anti-Semitism, who say it's not okay to rape, murder, and kill kids, who, all these things, they're all under protective custody right now. They're all under police community protection. And I think it's important to point this out because it shows how a small, extreme minority, a group of people who are willing to go to the extreme of threatening violence, can completely change the narrative, can completely dominate the conversation, can completely change the arc of a conversation. Extremists just happen to have the ability to completely change the narrative. And we have to acknowledge that whenever we discuss anything that involves any extremist, that we have to also acknowledge that there are people who are not extremists, and that the extremists go after those who are not extremists, or otherwise we allow the extremists to shape the conversation that we have. And that's really important in situations like these. Another thing that I wanted to point out is we are currently in Europe going through a huge immigration wave. People, whenever I bring up that we should probably deport people who support the Taliban, people always go like, oh, you're anti-Muslim migration, you are anti-immigration. I'm not anti-immigration. Like, I really like, for example, a proposal by the Portuguese government that we should have an open borders policy with much of South America, with Brazil, Argentina, Chile. I believe we should have open borders with Mexico because you Americans seem to not appreciate Mexicans that much, and I think we should take advantage of that and get those Mexicans who want to immigrate for work to us. And another thing, which is kind of funny, is we're currently going through a huge immigration wave in Europe right now, throughout the last 10 years. Can you guess from where? From the Philippines. In the last 5-10 years, 10 million Filipinos have immigrated to Europe. Europe is actually becoming, if you look at immigration numbers, a lot more Asian. There's a lot more people from Asian countries who are coming here, Vietnamese, Malaysians, Indonesians, but in particular, a lot of Filipinos. A lot of Filipinos are coming to Europe, and we're going to have a lot of Filipino communities here. And you're also, if you live in the city, you're starting to see it already. And there's something funny that I need to point out here, and I think it points to something, right? You don't see it. I mean that in the sense of you don't see it in the news. You don't see it in the immigration debates. Like, I think most people watching this, to them, or even to you, this is a surprise that we're having a big Filipino immigration wave right now, that 10 million Filipinos emigrated to Europe in the last few years. They're not in the headlines. So what is this? Why are we not hearing this? Is it because Filipinos are better into integrating society and just don't cause issues that are newsworthy? Or is it because the media and those who run the media are just not interested into finding potential issues? Like, there are more things open to discussion here.
I have somewhat of an answer. I also looked into this a while ago, quite a while ago, when I was comparing the reactions to Turkish immigrants to Germany. When I was comparing that to immigrants from Spain and from Italy and other places, for example. You might know from the recent history during the whole guest worker process which Germany had. Germany accepted workers as visitors Many of them later just became residents from several countries, from Italy, from some Balkan countries, from Turkey and others. And statistics showed that Morocco, I believe, was one of the sources, and many of them also went to the Netherlands, for example. But they compare the statistics, and they find that those who are from these different countries, aside from Turkey and Morocco, are significantly higher in terms of work efficiency, in terms of their accomplishments, in terms of abstaining from crime and this and that, whereas the Turkish immigrants or the others from other Muslim countries tend to be much more involved in criminal activities, much more. They tend to much more create certain communities where they then, isolate themselves and treat the local Germans as basically enemies and things like that. And then there is also the example of, I don't know, you have Hindus, you have Indian immigrants everywhere. You never you see that they are often considered very, very big. They achieve great accomplishments. They have the highest education levels across Western countries when they travel there. Whereas Pakistan, which is a neighboring country, tends to score extremely low in comparison and much higher in terms of crimes committed, much lower in terms of integration. There is a big problem that's just, people need to
I actually
talk
want
about.
the opposite from what you read.
I think,
sorry. You,
yeah,
please.
sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Ralph. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something important I want to add. I think that Dylan does point to something important when he says that in Europe, we don't necessarily have had the best history at integrating immigrants. I can speak mainly about the Algerian community in France, for example. The Algerian community, a lot of the people who have escaped towards France were people who left after the Algerian Revolution. The Algerian Revolution was like tightly identified with Islam. It was very anti-secular. It resisted a lot of the things that, French state building was about. A lot of that was, or interpretations of secularization or very strong ideas towards civic law and civic society. And that first generation of immigrants who, the French despectively called the Pieds Noirs, they were very secular. They were the people who resented the Islamic Revolution, and they went to France and to join the society that they were used to and they favored. A lot of them were Algerians. Not all of them were like the white French who settled Algeria. You had a decent portion of Arabs who went to the north after Algerian independence. And you do see that some of their children have, resisted the secularism of their parents to become, sometimes Islamists, and that's like something interesting. A lot of the things we convene as for why that happens is that
Burns is
France has not been
morally
great
corrupt
at assimilating most of the Algerians. There is stigma against Algerians, there is mistreatment against Algerians, and sometimes Islamism gives a voice, gives a sort of identity to group around to a lot of these people where they can otherwise not voice their oppression in a productive way. Islamism, in a way, has maybe not a great, but a political theory that allows a lot of these people to explain, their oppression in terms that may make sense in the absence of integration. So, I mentioned this in terms of Islam, but I've also seen it in the, I have a friend who is from the Albanian community of southern London, right? And he can describe in very similar terms that the Albanian mafia exists in London precisely because it has created, the London, these kinds of ethnic ghettos, as Ab mentioned. It's, in order to minimize the effect of these radicalizing groups, it would be very important that European societies were able to integrate immigrants in such a way that their own terms were considered. And we have done this with European minorities in the past. I have, for example, with the Basques. The Basques at some point had a very violent resistance movement, but the Spanish were very adept at integrating the Basques. And the moment that they did that, their the ETAs, the terrorist organization that was very similar to the IRA, and the IRA itself, for example, slowly faded away as the societies from which they emerged lost their sympathy for those groups as they became better integrated. So we can discuss the fact that there are problems in these communities, there are problems in Muslim communities in Europe, and I think that's perfectly valid. But if we are going to address them, probably the best thing we have to do is to discuss what can we offer. What can we offer as an alternative to these first, second, third generation immigrants that might not feel at home, in the countries that we've created.
Just to back you up, there's a book that I read a while ago that was about the way that quite a large amount of European Muslim terrorists are exactly that. They're second generation rather than first. And one of the reasons the second generation Muslims in Europe get radicalized is very much in the same way and through the same processes that white terrorists do as well, because it's not that they identify all that much with the conservative Islam of their parents. Like, they don't really identify with the culture of the old country that their parents brought with them. But they also don't identify with the Western society that they're brought up in, probably because of like bullying and other kind of shit. And then that's why they get turned on to this kind of third way, which is actually like a very modernist, like radical Islam, where people will like go and join ISIS because they'll get radicalized by jihadi rap videos and stuff like that. And then they'll go and join like an ISIS group in the Middle East, and they'll turn up there and they'll be surprised to find out that half the people there don't even know how to pray properly. And like, these people don't really give a fuck about Islam, particularly in the traditional sense. And I think that maybe shows you why when you look at what happens in America, where there are quite a lot of Muslims, they don't seem to have the same problem at the same widespread rate that you have it in Europe, which suggests that there's more than just like the faith that their parents bring with them. It's more to do with the way that integration fails in Europe compared to how it does in America. But I'd also be interested to see like data for that, because I remember seeing a survey from the UK that found that like something like 40% of British Muslims hold at least like some level of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Like they'll either think that Jews have too much power in the media or politics, or they'll say that Jews are more likely to use the Holocaust to further their political goals. But I found that same number, 40-50%, was about the same for the general public as well in the UK. So I wouldn't be surprised to learn that European Muslims have like more anti-Semitic views in general, but I'm very skeptical as to how.
I can recommend you a book,
so
if you want.
Yeah.
I'll just have to find it.
Might not read it, but I'll give it a go.
I just want to quickly say about education and crime levels on Muslims that move to Europe or move to the United States. I really don't like the painting of like crime levels or education levels with a broad brush across the Muslim world. If you look at the Iranian diaspora, for example, people who left after the Iranian Revolution, they a lot of times have a much higher education level. If you look at people, it depends on which Muslim country, what was the conditions of the Muslim country when these waves of immigration happened. For example, in Libya and Syria, the education level of much of the diaspora leaving from the civil war are not going to be the same as the Iranian diaspora due to a whole bunch of different geopolitical, socioeconomic reasons. So I wanted to just put that out there, because an immigrant fleeing with a doctorate who's scared because he's part of the intellectual class is very different than somebody with no education level and who's never been to higher education fleeing because the Civil War just happened. He doesn't really feel like he has many other options, right? I feel that there's a big gap between these two things. So I just wanted to put that out there. As for when we're talking about bringing in migrants who have different social values than the rest of us, and then in the second and third generation migrants feeling isolated, I feel like the deportation option is kind of I feel like it's a cop-out. It's hard for people to deal with the fact that these groups of people feel socially isolated in society. And deporting them is the simple answer, even though it's the answer that I don't even think Europe might necessarily even have on the table. European societies demographically are aging quite rapidly. They're going to have a high level of older gentlemen and gentlewomen who are going to need to be funded by a working class of people who pay into their social programs. And currently, not enough people in Europe are being born to be able to pay for those social programs. So I don't understand if people see that clear economic outlook, while the first option for some people would just be deport them, instead of how can we make it so third and second generation immigrants feel more at home, feel more welcome in the communities, feel more integrated, and we can combat radicalism at its source. How do we combat radicalism at its source? I feel like the deport option is not only economically disastrous, but I feel it's a cop-out.
LonerBox, European Muslim Anti-Semitism. Why young? Okay, Günther Yekeli is the book.
Don't
is
you
his
think...
microphone better, by the way?
I want to point out one thing, Dylan. Persians or Iranians who came to Europe or who traveled westward after the revolution are very often people who specifically didn't want to live in an Islamic country, didn't want to live in under the Islamic Revolution. Lots of them are atheists, secularists, and so on. There are lots of families, known ones and unknown ones. I've heard of and encountered different ones. Many of them are not even Muslim, or are just Muslim by name, or converted to different religions after they arrived. So and there is a very big difference between the Iranian community and the rest of the Muslim world, even in terms of their current religious adherence, for example, where they are vastly Shia Muslims, if they are Muslims, as opposed to the Sunni majority. But the one thing is, so if you think that that deporting is not a good option because it's not economically a good idea or financially a good idea, or that they should, because of their youth, kind of serve as a working population. That sounds a little bit like it has some strangely, ironically, I don't know, a discriminatory undertones.
Well, I'm a racist.
And the bad thing is also de-radicalizing and integrating people sounds very, very nice, but what are you going to do? Are you going to hug them and tell them that their views are wrong? There was a speech that Angela Merkel gave several years ago where she basically said, we had this whole ideal of creating a multicultural society and integrate people, and we worked on it, but it is a failed project. It is a complete failure, she said. And she was asking how to fix the situation. So I feel like it's not very pragmatic to rule out these options.
So I would first say,
I wanted to point something out to Dylan. Like, you're right about this. We need Germany needs 40,000 people every year, new people, either born or immigrated, to keep its social services running. That's true. That is absolutely correct. So here's the thing: people are noticing that the option to deport Muslim immigrants is being more openly discussed than ever before, and even left-leaning politicians are not talking about it, especially in terms of those who refuse to integrate or are badly integrated or commit anti-Semitic hate crimes, etc. The reason why this is now being more openly discussed is because of Asian immigration, because Asian immigration is going up massively. We're getting more and more people, as mentioned before, from the Philippines, from India, from Vietnam. And I guess what is happening in political circles is that people see Vietnamese, Filipino immigrants as a sort of an alternative. Another thing that I wanted to point out, because I think it's really important, I agree with you on one thing here. No way in hell should a European state ever create stateless people. No way in hell should you revoke citizenship of someone who doesn't have another citizenship. I think just on a legal principle, you should only revoke the citizenship of someone who already has another citizenship. Statelessness is one of the most horrific things you can do to a person. And I'd add to that you should also not deport people to places that you can't deport them to. Like, say, for example, a Syrian screams gas juice or something, or denies the Holocaust on Facebook and gets arrested. Okay, he should serve the prison terms, but no way in hell should this person be deported back to Assad, Syria. No way in hell should that person be deported to a country where he's likely to get tortured or gassed or anything like that. That's just not an option. I don't think you can
facilities.
Yeah. I don't know what you do, but you can't deport someone to a place like Syria or Afghanistan. That's
If I can, I want to give Dylan the last word on this. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to answer being Hitler quick, if that's possible. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. It has, for me, it's just a bureaucracy thing. You need working class people in order to fund the social services of older people. It's the endless cycle of modern European and like social like service. It's how it works. You have to have people who fund the social programs. You can't just have the elderly people constantly paying into it because they're the ones taking out of it. And whatever migrants come to Europe or come to a state that has to have that societal responsibility fulfilled are going to need migrants if they're not able to upkeep their own population through native birth rates. It has nothing to do with the fact that they're brown or Muslim or anything, and I want the Muslims working in the coal mine for the 90-year-old Nazis on social programs. I don't want that. That's not what I'm asking for, okay? It's just a problem of any nation state with social services that they're going to have working class people paying into it. As for the comment about the Iranians, I would say that also shows that people can be Muslim and they can be secular. That is 100% possible. And I just was, because we were talking a lot in broad terms, and I don't like broad terms because I see the broad terms on Fox News. I see the broad terms on TV when we're talking about migrant groups, like Palestinians are anti-Semitic. This group is this group is that. And then I'm imagining like the psychopath sitting at their home, twitching, being like, oh, so the Palestinians, I know a Palestinian down the street. I bet they're anti-Semitic. I bet they're this. And I just generally want to make sure that people know that we're not trying to paint with a broad brush here. We're saying that certain countries have more of a religious extremism problem than other countries, and there are certain Muslims that have a more problem with extremism than other Muslims, as is also problems with other religions, even though, of course, Islamic extremism is different than the type of extremism you see in Christian communities. I wanted to make sure we weren't painting with that broad brush.
Yeah. Hold on. I think that's kind of I can't just deny the truth just because there is a possibility of somebody taking it out of context and then doing something dangerous with it. I know for a fact from the research, from the statistics, that the majority of Muslims around the world say that Sharia, Islamic law, should rule society, and the majority of those believe in executing adulterers, banning homosexuality. Half of them believe in killing those who leave Islam, punishing blasphemy, and all of that. And these are facts. You can't just hide that or deny it or not talk about it because there is a danger of
I didn't say don't talk about statistics. I said don't say all Muslims hate the Jews. Don't say all Muslims do this. We can't say Muslim immigrants believe this, Muslim immigrants believe that, because if that's true, then that would be true of all Muslim immigrants. We can say this immigrant community has higher rates of this, or this immigrant community has higher rates of this. Let's examine the social economic conditions that created that. Let's examine the ideological conditions that created that. But I don't want to paint with that broad brush, because I do feel like that is what leads to that, like McDonald's, like Palestinian boy stabbing that happened between that landlord who did that horrific hate crime, is when you get the image in your head that this whole group is guilty. They're all guilty of the crime of anti-Semitism. They're all guilty of the crime of this. Then all that's going to do is end up isolating these communities more and pushing those communities through isolation to be more vulnerable to be recruited by the religious extremists that we're supposedly fighting against.
Yeah. So,
but I do also just want to say that when we talk about Sharia law, interpretations of Sharia law, when people answer that question, is still a big question mark when we talk about that polling data. And we're talking about groups of people that go to Europe, not all Muslims everywhere, because somebody who has the conditions that make them either go to Europe or makes the decision to go to Europe is going to be different than somebody who decides to live and die in Indonesia their whole life.
No, I would say that's
pretty sure. I'm also pretty sure that that's not.
Okay, Stardust said she wanted to continue to new questions.
I do want to move on to the next topic. I'll let LonerBox get in a quick word, and then we'll move to the next topic. Okay.
It's also just acknowledging that regionally these are going to be huge differences. So if you look at like the people who believe that you should kill apostates, right? That number I think is pretty high in like Egypt, Jordan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. It's probably quite high in the Palestinian territories as well. It's quite low in other like high like Muslim majority countries like Albania, Kosovo, Kazakhstan. So yeah, there's a bit more to it than just like when you say the Muslim world, you're talking about specific areas, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, if I can. Okay, so we have a super chat from Short Fat Otaku, Dev. He wants to say, great panels recently, Stardust. I watch almost everybody here, and you guys are great. Question, why does Kraut have cat ears? Would you like to answer that question, Kraut?
I've had a gift by someone.
Okay. All right.
Who's probably watching.
Yes. All right. Next topic. What do anti-Semitic outbursts on social media say about the state of discourse on social media, and how does one deal with it? What are possible solutions? I think us going through opening statements might take too long, but if we keep it to 30 seconds each, then I think we can do it. So can you guys do 30 seconds each for your opening statement?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think I can.
Okay. All right. Let's start with Ravignon again.
I would say that social media often has the most unaccountable people when it comes to expressing opinions. So, you know, oftentimes the things that we see are the worst examples of things that would be said. It is very concerning that people express those kinds of beliefs, but I am pretty sure that most of the people who do would not say the same in public or wouldn't act on most of the things that they say.
Okay, next up is Twisted Aviator.
Social media is the it's the meme land, right? Everybody takes the most extreme stance they can. That pretty much is, not everybody, but you see the most extreme stances on social media because people don't have accountability online, generally speaking.
Okay. Next, LonerBox.
I think leftists get so stuck into the oppressor-oppressed lens of analysis that they just replace their eyeballs with that lens of analysis, and then they can't call out bigotry from marginalized communities ever, and it's really embarrassing.
Okay. Kraut.
I think this is something that was like simmering beneath the surface for like ages. Well, not really simmering beneath the surface. There are many people who have, especially academics who have for years now warned that there's a rise in anti-Semitism, not just on the left, but also on the right. We also saw that many neo-Nazis like cockroaches came out from beneath the rocks during recent weeks. It's just there. There was a refusal to acknowledge it and to confront it. I think a lot of people deliberately looked away. I remember during the previous British election, Corbyn endorsed and praised a book called Imperialism by Robson. I don't know if you read the book. One of its core theses is that the First World War was caused by a Jewish conspiracy and that Jews live off murdering goyim, getting non-Jews to kill each other. It's pretty gross shit. I also have to add that I believe that authoritarian movements are inherently self-destructive. In terms of those at least who have extremist positions, that they drive each other. They have a tendency to amplify the extremes and that everyone tries to be more extreme than the other. And that is a very self-destructive process. And what we're seeing right now, especially on college campuses, is actually that self-destruction. These people will be unemployable for the rest of their lives. People will remember what they did. We're just watching them self-destruct right now, I think.
Dylan.
I think a lot of it is that this was simmering under the surface, but nobody was willing to go to like the local pub and just start spamming random like anti-Semitic slogans, but they are perfectly willing to do it when there's not anyone looking at them and there's a screen that they can use to, you know, separate themselves from directly saying this to other people. I also think that social media just generally has a massive problem with promoting and rewarding the most hateful and incendiary rhetoric possible. It's the same reason why we're all saying in our For You pages on Twitter, like people saying World War III, World War III, World War III is around the corner. Whole world's going to blow up. We're all going to die. You know who controls the world? BlackRock. BlackRock and Zelensky, the Jew, controls everything. It's because that type of rhetoric is going to catch people's attention. When people are mad, they're more likely to comment, which then boosts it in the algorithm. This isn't just a Twitter problem. This is a Facebook problem. This is an Instagram problem. This is a social media problem, and it's a human problem. The reason why social media works so well is because it seeps into the worst cracks of your mind. It takes advantage of the worst attributes of human behavior.
Okay, last but not least, AP.
Yeah, I also have to say that that it's I don't think that there is a sudden rise in anti-Semitism. It's just all the anti-Semitism that was always there is coming to the surface, and people from all circles, from all sides, are currently encouraging each other to simply openly say all the terrible things all the terrible positions that they held before. And unfortunately, it's also not people anonymously saying something that they wouldn't say outside. Lots of people publicly, with their actual names, go and encourage each other to say some really horrible shit at the moment, and it's just a reality that shouldn't have been ignored for such a long time.
Can I just add? I think it is fair to say, and I think all of us can agree on this, I think that a few months from now, a lot of people will regret a lot what they posted.
Probably.
Yeah, for sure.
I would like to believe that,
sure.
but I also don't know if I even honestly believe that a lot of people are going to be punished by it. It seems like such a widespread issue, the anti-Semitism, that I think that it's people are just going to like fade into the sea of it, you know?
Oh no!
Like some people might,
No.
but-
I know a federal German police officer who told me already that people, like he told me that especially immigrants who've posted TikToks celebrating this stuff, are having their identities already checked and being reported internally to immigration services already.
Nice.
Like,
Is that in the US or in
Germany.
Europe?
In Germany.
In
Europe,
Germany.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's not. A lot of people are going to. It's not just people who are going to get cancelled. Where it's like you tweeted this celebrating rape and murder on the 7th. People will probably actually get deported over this.
There was a recent tweet, and I shared that several times on my own Twitter now, of some Muslim apologist, for example. He posted about that one woman, Shani Luke. She was brutally abducted and brutally killed, and her legs were broken and whatever it is, and she was paraded while the regular population beat her and spit on her dead body and stuff like that. It's just very messed up. And one commentator on Twitter said something like that people are just paying attention to this rave prostitute because
that's an Australian Syrian. Yeah,
because they're trying to appeal to something. No, I'm talking about Daniel Kikichu. He's actually a Muslim American Muslim apologist. And that tweet, you would say, "Wow, that's horrible. Who would agree with that?" And you actually go on it, and by now I think it has like 4,000 likes and barely any objections. And this is a very widely these opinions are very widely held, and people won't just.
Keep in mind that Twitter is only like 1% of the American population. I don't think that there's a lot.
Yeah. This is the thing that gets me, is because I spend a lot of time online, much more probably than the average person. I think probably everybody in this room has a similar experience to that. And I am constantly trying to go out into the real world and talk to people about these issues, even annoy them to some extent, because I'm terrified that my online presence is giving me a bad view of what people in the real world off the internet, the people who aren't scared to call a DoorDash driver and say their delivery was late or something like that, people without that, like who are actually willing to talk to other people. And I just am very fearful of saying this got 20,000 likes on Twitter. Therefore, this is what everybody agrees with. If that's the case, then Americans are going to all vote for Jackson Hinkle next election, right? Because he's out of nowhere, he's blown up on Twitter. But if you took his beliefs and you sat down Americans or most people and said, do you believe that MAGA communism will dominate the world? They're going to say, no, that's fucking stupid. So there is a disconnect between social media and the real world, and we need to acknowledge that. That's not to say the social media doesn't impact the real world. It does. You could see that violence in Ethiopia, for example. You can see the violence in Myanmar, for example, and how social media led to real lynchings, real genocidal behavior. So it's not something to be ignored, but also we shouldn't pretend that social media is the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say in the case of Jackson Hinkle, most of his followers are probably not American, so it's probably not going to impact him anyway. But
yeah, something I am, perhaps in the spirit of social media, I'm very concerned about is that a lot of the recent stripes of anti-Semitism that I've seen that really concern me are individual kind of items where we see that Jewish people, whether they're like, Israelis or not, whether they support Israel or not, are being treated as these assets that people know that they can attack in order to upset the state of Israel. That's like a very particular and very special type of dehumanization that I'm very concerned about. I'm sure, Aries, who could not attend, was very concerned about when she saw it in Canada. That, Jews, whether they have a connection with Israel or not, whether they have political sympathies with Israel or not, are being treated as these sort of items that people can attack in order to get a rise out of Israelis. And there's like a very special type of dehumanization where, human beings, regardless of the content of their character, become these sort of symbols that can be attacked in order to, make a broader political point. I think social media can facilitate that kind of thing happening, but it's also true of Arabs, right? Arabs are also the target of particular types of dehumanization. There have been struggles in particular areas of the internet right wing that have always kind of sided with these sort of anti-immigration, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim kind of stripe of, domestic politics, I want to say. And they're not fans of Jewish people, but all of a sudden they support Israel, There's this sort of strange kind of dehumanization going on. And I think that's probably the worst thing that social media facilitates. The fact that it allows people to create this distance between the human beings that they're interacting with, and, the actual opinions and things that they want to purport. So, yeah.
There was that, you kind of undersold it with your 4K tweets thing, Apostate. There was that guy today who did the whole, do you condemn Hamas? No, I actually think they should do more, kind of, and they got 65,000 likes. So for the online space, I think it does matter. And if you go to Twitter and you just type in, do you condemn Hamas? There's just loads of people repeating that whole, no, I don't. So and then posting pictures of Hamas militants and celebrating it. So I think for the online space, it does, I guess that's where we are. It's worth focusing on, because the problem is that people who have that attitude have gotten away with that behavior for years, like left-wing YouTubers and Twitter users and all that, who have behaved in that way and openly supported Hamas or Hezbollah or anything like that just for the longest time. And they'll do lots of bannable shit, but because it's progressive, it's like the TOS just doesn't really care for it.
I'm also worried about something else. I used to be an anti-SJW YouTuber many years ago, and one thing I noticed is that in the last 4 weeks, a lot of these people sort of like cockroaches came out of the corners and sort of, hey, do you want to join us again? Come back to us, and stuff like that. I think that what happened in these last 4 weeks is, at least in terms of social media, the biggest gift to the online far right. The left has ever given them. It's going to be, they're so going to profit out of this. They're going to slaughter this out to the rest. One of the most disgusting things I've seen over the last 4 weeks, really reprehensible. You may talk about people who praise Hamas. All you want, the far left extremist ones, etc., do that, fine. But one of the most reprehensible and vile things I saw was that Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, used footage from the massacres in his political adverts before the massacres were even over. Like, clip them out while they were being streamed, put them in an advert of his, and played that shit. To say, oh, it's so great that we built the border wall to keep all the Albanians out, as if Albanians are Hamas or something. It's so. In terms of how social media is going to change, I think there's going to be a very big right-wing resurgence coming out of this.
Yeah, you know what the bad thing is also.
What I've got a bit confused about is I don't know how. Sorry, I'll be really quick. I don't know how much of a just like a again like online thing this is, but even the right wing, I've noticed there's like a bit of a split. Like Candace Owens has come out as like pro-Palestine and saying that Israel's committing a genocide in Gaza right now. Because I guess if you're right wing, you've got this problem where you don't actually know if your audience is more Islamophobic or more anti-Semitic. So you're stuck.
She's also an Andrew Tate fan, so that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But there is a section of people who are kind of on the right wing, who are these supposedly traditionalist people, and especially big Russia fans, and who like to go with conspiracy theories. Many of them started speaking for for Hamas and blasting Israel. Probably also because it turned out to be very profitable. I mean, we just mentioned Jackson Hinkle, for example. That guy. Yeah. He was insignificant very much before October 7th. On October 7th, he started speaking about Palestine, Israel for the first time, and then he didn't stop anymore because he started getting engagement in wild ways. I think he got like 1 million new followers over the last few weeks after he started speaking on this. It turns out it gets a lot of engagement, a lot of profits for him. So that's what he's doing now. And then the neo-Nazis are jumping into it now. The neo-Nazis are suddenly being retweeted by Islamic scholars that I was looking at for quite a while. What the hell is happening? It's just...
So I'm actually working on a video on this, but essentially I've seen a lot of like the rhetoric that has been used by the far left who are supporting kind of Hamas's actions has been the same rhetoric I've seen on the side of the far right. So, for example, everybody tweets out that picture of Palestine and things changing over the years, the territories changing over the years. I kid you not, the NJP, which is like the Nazi Party of the United States, that on Telegram, they tweeted out that map, and then they tweeted out a picture of the United States and said, how would you feel if your country changed like this? And then they started showing like a changing map of the United States. So it is a little bit concerning that I see a lot of like far left people who don't recognize the holes that they're kind of falling into with their language. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to weigh in. I know I'm like a moderator, but yeah.
Those people clearly don't care about the Palestinians, right? They don't give a shit about the Palestinian lives. They are just trying to make use of the situation right now to go after the Jews and to basically be like, you see how the Jews are controlling everything. They can do whatever they want. And people are actually buying this. I mean, Ryan Dawson, one of these conspiracy theorist nut job scumbags. I'm seeing him everywhere right now. I had to mute him so I don't see his tweets anymore because he's being retweeted by people who would otherwise never follow him or never share anything from him, even leftists. I don't know. And,
wait, leftists retweet Ryan Dawson?
Yes. I saw leftists retweet him, and that was one of those points where I thought, what the fuck is happening? I have to take a break from.
I have to tell you that.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I'm just putting this in there. I'm going to have to make a video in the near future why I hate Modi and Hindu nationalists because I am. I just want to warn everyone: don't think that Hindu nationalists are your friends in anything here. No matter what your position, like no way in hell. These people are no better than Hamas in many regards. If you look at the pogroms these people did in Mumbai and in other cities where they ragged Muslim families out of their homes, doused them in gasoline and burned them alive, these people are monsters. Do not for a second believe that these people are your friends.
Yeah.
There's still Muslims in India who are like being lynched for the suspicion of having eaten beef. By Hindu nationalists, so it's pretty rough.
And I think that's something very important to underline by the end of the day. I don't really believe there will be any sort of like meaningful far right shift, because the communities that are mainly being affected by these circumstances, you know, whether it's the Arab population, the Muslim population, the I'm thinking of the Jewish population, and you know, we haven't talked too much about Ukraine, but the Ukrainians as well. All of these people have been victims of Nazism. All of these people have been victims of things that we could consider flavors of far right. And you know, I think opinion in these communities is very complex. They're obviously not going to side with the, you know, nationalists all of a sudden, you know, just because, you know, Jackson Hinkle or whoever are suddenly talking about these, you know, new MAGA kind of alignments in a way that tries to pander to these communities. The possibility of a shift towards them from these like larger spaces is very unlikely, because I think they know that the moment that they stop being useful to them, they're going to cut that, you know, cut that support. To the degree that, for example, you know, the Republican Party seeks alliances in conservative Mexican communities, let's say, you know, the Mexicans kind of know that they're going to be next in some regard. So in that sense, I'm not very concerned about the far right shift. I think this pandering is just, you know, something that they're trying to do for engagement. But in a large political sense, I believe it's going to be very ineffective. I hope to be right, at least.
So I wanted to mention two things. Now, this is a simple one, but I need to play the hippie and say this. In the same way that violence begets violence, a hateful rhetoric will beget hateful rhetoric. If you're somebody online, let's say you're part of the Palestinian diaspora in Sweden or somewhere, and like you may have never even had an anti-Semitic thought in your life for whatever reason, like maybe your parents didn't believe that, so they'd pass, you never did. And then you start seeing messages online like, oh, these Palestinian terrorists, man, they all are in open sewage and this and that, and you know, they're all Hamas and terror. You see that type of rhetoric, a lot of people's natural reaction will be, well, fuck you, and then they'll start reaching for responses they could have, and that's where a lot of bigotry does genuinely start. In the same way that violence begets violence, racism and bigotry begets racism and bigotry. I also wanted to bring up, and I know that the topic is anti-Semitism, but I'd feel really bad if I didn't bring it up at some point. In American politics, anti-Semitism is obviously a massive issue. But in elected American politics, for those who are in elected office, the type of rhetoric I'm seeing, the type of extremist rhetoric I'm seeing from those in positions of powers who go on C-SPAN and talk about their policies, it's a lot of just unbelievably hateful, like bloodthirsty rhetoric being directed toward the Palestinian community. I don't know if people saw what Mitch McConnell said about flatten Gaza. Tom Cotton fucking bounced the rubble. Seeing Jesse Waters on Fox News during one of their primetime hours, basically saying, what is the difference between Hamas and Palestinians? All Palestinians are anti-Semites. I know all of them are. All of them support what Hamas did, and they're all one big group, even though Hamas hasn't had an election since 2006. Even though when Hamas did have that election, a lot of people voted against Hamas. Even though more than 50% of the Palestinian population are under the age of 18. Actually, I think it's 48% under the age of 14. But that type of rhetoric is having basically no repercussions in traditional American politics, and that type of language begets more language like that in response. Violence begets violence.
Not to take away from your point, but I have to point out one thing, which is, yes, Hamas might not be supported by all of Palestinians, but the most popular party that people would probably go for, according to Washington Institute and even a Palestinian research organization based in Ramallah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad would get like over, I think, 70% of their support, which is they're currently working together with Hamas, and in these operations, and you could say that they're even more extreme than Hamas in certain ways, or not in others. And 65% say we should not stop until we have until all of historic Palestine belongs to us. So I get your point, and yes, I do believe it is completely wrong to say all Palestinians are terrorists, all Palestinians are this and that. By the way, 99%, according to the last research, dislike Jews. But that said, while it is wrong to say that this is true for all of them, it is a huge problem among Palestinians, and it needs to be addressed.
Well, I do believe anti-Semitism should be addressed amongst the Palestinian community, but anti-Semitism is not a justification either to keep a population stateless or to barbarically bomb them, as Jesse Waters and other American politicians with real American political power, who are the people voting on sending weapons to Israel. This is not the type of rhetoric we should be seeing from these politicians. As for the beliefs of the Palestinian population, I believe in that same study you reference, 65% of the Palestinians did not want to break the ceasefire with Israel. And I do think that is something to be noted, that 65% of them wouldn't have supported starting this war. They might not like Israel. There's a lot of obviously bad blood between the Israelis and the Palestinians when it comes to mass displacement, the poisoning of wells, killings and terror attacks. It's one thing to hate your neighbor. It's another thing to go kill them. And 65% of Palestinians did not want to break the ceasefire.
But I don't like this entire conversation. I don't like the entire premise of this conversation in the sense of that I don't know why we in the West have this obsession with creating, with like talking about Palestinian votes or elections. It's not our job to nation build in Palestine. It's not our job to create a Palestinian democracy. I think the emphasis, like I believe in the two-state solution. I believe the Palestinians should be given their state, and they get to decide. They should have their own political struggles over how they govern themselves. If that ends up being a dictatorship or whatever, so be it. It should be their problem. I don't think
that's a problem. That's a problem. I think in the West, we actually it's actually important to discuss how Palestinians think, what they want, and
I'm getting at this.
Like,
maybe I expressed myself badly. I believe that nation-building projects are very complex, difficult, incredibly expensive. I'm currently reading a book about why the nation-building process in Bosnia failed so catastrophically. And I'm interested in this because I'm comparing it to sort of Ukraine and why democratization in Ukraine worked. And what I can say about Ukraine, why it worked there, is because the Ukrainians wanted democracy. They wanted less corruption. They wanted a freer country. And if you're going to talk about nation building in Palestine for the Palestinians, you better be ready to bring up the resources for it. You better be ready to bring up the billions that are needed to build infrastructure, to invest in education systems, etc., etc. You can't just point your fingers at the Palestinians and say, why are you so bad people, when you don't put anything into or invest anything into or put any effort into improving the sort of conditions that created these attitudes in the first place. That's just.
I will also.
And they do. They do.
Like,
I have to underline. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I went first last time. You go first.
Okay. Yeah, and one of my videos that I've made discusses precisely neoliberal attempts to create a sort of effective capitalism in Palestine. There have been many attempts to create that sort of infrastructure, those sort of resources, but in the end, the question in Palestine that really needs to be resolved is a political question, and development needs to happen as an asset to a political resolution. The big problem that Palestine has right now, as Dylan correctly pointed out, is that there is no specific leadership to point to. Mahmoud Abbas, he doesn't have a lot of power in Gaza. Most Palestinians consider Fatah like a corrupt party. Hamas is like an organization that is not going to get any sort of international recognition before the 7th of October. After the 7th of October, probably less so. So Palestinian leadership needs to emerge, and it's probably better if it does so in the terms of the Palestinians. But an important thing to also observe is that Israel has been instrumental in decapitating that Palestinian leadership. Israel probably has one of the most sophisticated assassination kind of structures and ops that exist in the world. And they've weaponized that against the Palestinian Liberation Organization, against Palestinian movements in general. And in order for there to be a Palestinian authority which someone can negotiate, that authority would need to emerge, consolidate, and centralize. And I'm not sure if Israel, at least under its current government, will allow for that thing to happen. So, I think one thing we should not lose in terms of perspective is that in the current situation, Israel has most of the cards. They need to be the ones to show a willingness for a leadership to emerge and for negotiations to happen. In that sense, whether we have a one-state solution, a two-state solution, or any solution, for there to be a Palestinian negotiating party that can agree to peace, that can agree to, let's say, truth and reconciliation, it's going to be very important that a leadership and a movement and something can emerge. Because if left to just regular, capital forces, it's going to be very difficult. It's just going to be the Israeli state dictating the terms of whatever ends up happening. And there will be no Palestinian input. So in that case, in that sense, it's very important that the Palestinians get, leadership authority and just a project they want to pursue.
I think that's why
need to let that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, because first of all, I guess if Palestinians get a state, they're not getting a military. That's probably very unlikely for at least the first little while. But when it comes to, I read a lot of Palestinian polls very frequently because they come out quite often. I don't think you'll ever see a population where their opinions fluctuate so much depending on what's happening. When you go from Oslo in 93 and how between 80 and 90% of people supported Arafat at a time when his public stance was condemn terrorism, renounce terrorism, and recognize Israel, because they believed that Oslo would lead them to a state. They didn't give a fuck about Hamas at that time. I think 10% of them maybe. If you looked at it even just earlier this year, the most popular leader in Palestine was Barghouti. It wasn't Hania or Abbas. And Marwan is he's a secularist. He's not non-violent, but he's a secularist. So I think that does matter. And I think, obviously, right now, I think if you polled them, they'd probably all be supporting Hamas, or probably in quite large numbers, because all the protests have suggested that. But yeah, it just depends on whether or not they can be shown that negotiation and secularism will achieve something for them, because right now they have no reason to believe that.
I believe their beliefs, their opinions are I don't trust opinion polls anymore since the Trump election. That is sort of a thing that I have. It's just a quirk of mine. Sorry, I think it also doesn't matter. I honestly think it doesn't matter what Palestinian you all might really roughly disagree with this. I think that we should offer Israel NATO membership in exchange for pulling out of the West Bank and just leaving the Palestinians to have a state, because I think the threat, what happens then is the Palestinians get the opportunity to build their own state on the West Bank. And if they even think about doing anything to Israel, the threat of a war with all of NATO and not just with Israel looms over them then.
But here's the problem. So Israel disengaged from Gaza, and I know that there's a lot of disagreement on whether that was done correctly and whether a proper disengagement was done. But they disengaged from Gaza in 2005, and the whole idea was there to allow them self-governance, and even the settlements were removed, and that was actually very unpopular on the Israeli right. But the idea was, under the recommendations of the Middle East Quartet, Gaza should have the chance to self-govern and to look toward an independent future and, toward recognition and all of that. But it didn't take very long, because just a year later, it was Hamas take over, and the self-governing project turns into a complete disaster, and terrorism like never seen before suddenly emerges. And now you have the Islamists, the ISIS of Gaza, fighting Israel.
Since you're bringing up the West Bank settlers, so for the last 2 years, I spent a lot of time, following news on Ukraine, military aid to Ukraine, donate a lot of money to Ukrainian causes, to the Ukrainian armed forces. I'm in tax trouble right now because I donated so much money to the Ukrainian armed forces. And I remember for the last 2 years how aggravating it was to get Western countries to support Ukraine, to send money and military gear to Ukraine. And right, and the one argument always made was, they're going to make the money disappear to build mansions, those corrupt Ukrainians, and they're just going to party, apparently, while they're being bombed by the Russians. And it's okay that Israel is now getting military aid from America, at least from my perspective. Some here might disagree with me on this, okay. But I know that a majority of the viewers here are probably American. And I'd like to emphasize to all of you that you should watch very carefully and make sure that not one single fucking cent of any aid that you're sending to Israel right now gets into even just a single fucking settlement on the West Bank. Because this is something that Netanyahu has done for years now. That he takes military aid that is supposed to go into the defense industry, and he pumps it into these fucking nut jobs and nut cases, these idiots who really are the ones who destroyed the peace process, who are sort of the gravediggers of Oslo. Not one single fucking cent should go to any of these people. And that is your responsibility if you're Americans, that you watch very carefully for that. And that if that happens, that you make it very clear to your representatives that not one further cent should go to Netanyahu, or that your government tells that cunt that he finally needs to fucking resign. So
not only did they do that, but also after the Gaza disengagement, in the same year as the disengagement, they took 8,000 settlers out of Gaza. More than 10,000 went into the West Bank the same year. It's no wonder that Palestinians never saw this as a sincere effort for peace. The right wing knew that pulling out of Gaza would land a victory to Hamas because it was done unilaterally. It wasn't the product of a negotiation, which was perfect for Hamas because they could just say, yeah, that happened because we were violent. That happened because they were fleeing our terror. And then they go to the polls next year and they fucking steamroll. But
I just saw someone in the chat say that that I'm sort of taking it a bit personal. Do not forget in this conversation how much Netanyahu contributed to destroying the peace process. Yesterday was the anniversary of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. Don't forget that it was Netanyahu who is basically his murderer, because Netanyahu is the one who riled up the crowds, who incited the extremists. Yes. Like, do not forget that. Don't forget what Netanyahu is, what his responsibility is, and that he has to fucking go.
There's also the thing with Hamas. Some people misunderstand and think that that Netanyahu, that there is proof that Netanyahu funded Hamas or something like that. But what actually happened, and was what the whole controversy was about, is that despite opinions in his own party, despite objections in his own party and across the board, Netanyahu thought, apparently, that is the surface of it, that is the official story, he thought it would be a fantastic idea to allow funds from Qatar and other sources to directly go and flow into Gaza, into the hands of Hamas, who would then, make use of it however they want, and that would somehow that would reduce the chances of them acting violently. That would somehow that would somehow it would be an implied deal. Like if he lets the funds freely flow into Gaza, into the hands of Hamas, they would commit fewer terrorist attacks. At least that's what the story is officially. I don't know. Maybe there's something really sinister behind this.
No, just to back up what you were just to back up what you were saying, it was total ineptitude, because what was happening not long before the October 7th was that there were border protests at the Gaza wall that Hamas called off when in exchange for those funding from Qatar. So before October 7th, I guarantee you, Netanyahu was sitting there thinking he had bought quiet from Hamas with that funding by allowing it to go through.
How stupid! I don't even understand. I mean. I don't get it. I'm not a politician. I
can tell you where I come from. In the 1980s, a lot of Cold War tacticians in the West believed that empowering Islamist organizations throughout the Middle East was a great way of undermining support for the Soviet Union. That's where this originally started.
What it just looks like is that Netanyahu was just trying to get through his own terms.
It's not just Netanyahu. Ariel Sharon empowered Hezbollah. Hezbollah is his fucking creation. It's also modern Islamism is a beast of the 20th century and basically came to be starting in the 1950s as a counter-reaction to the successes of Arab socialism, basically. Yeah, it's people who were petty.
Yeah, something we need to consider about, the domestic politics of Israel as well, which is, something we need to consider about the domestic politics of Israel as well is that, Likud and all of the terrorist movements that are kind of their enemies in a way need each other electorally, because Likud can waive the threat of Hezbollah, of Hamas to, the very far right Israelis and keep them galvanized. And these movements can do the same with the Israeli government, right? As long as the Israeli government is hostile, the Hamas and Hezbollah can continue to argue that their presence is necessary, that their activism is as well. And as long as these movements can do the same, then Likud can argue that they're the only ones that can protect Israelis. And in that sense, there is a sort of, dynamic that is codependent between them. One reason we could argue why things have not come to a final clash of conflict can be because there are very concrete power dynamics between them where they guarantee each other's position in power, each other's continued necessity in existence. And that's something that is often forgotten about, is that there are very non-ideological practical concerns about who keeps power in the region.
Okay, so Dylan, and then I want to move on to the next topic. I don't know how much more time people here have either, so Dylan, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I mean, I feel this kind of transitions into the next topic, so yeah. I think this will help. I feel very uncomfortable giving American weapons to Israel, and it's for a few reasons. Number one, if the Israeli people, which all polling data suggests, I know not everybody in here respects the polling data, but all polling data suggests and all public perceptions suggest that the Israeli public does not trust Netanyahu, that he built up the security apparatus in Israel over 12 years, where when you talk about Bush and 9/11, people try to make the comparison. There's one area where the comparison just doesn't work. And that is when it comes to how long Netanyahu was in power when October 7th happened compared to Bush. Bush was in power for 1 year. He didn't have the time to create the entire security apparatus, which failed on 9/11. The security apparatus which failed in Israel was Netanyahu's security apparatus. It was his government that he chose, managed by his ministers, many of which delusional far-right maniacs, which led to the failings that we saw that day. We still don't know all of the reasons why it failed, but we know that the government ignored warning signs and had troops deployed not near the Gaza border, but in the West Bank when they could have responded more quickly to save lives. So I feel uncomfortable giving weapons to a government which has already showed itself to be incompetent in managing a security situation. But I also feel uncomfortable giving weapons to a government which feels very unwilling to concede anything and has yet to really clearly outline what their plan is going into the Gaza Strip outside of eradicate Hamas. Now, I was very young when we invaded Afghanistan. When the towers came crashing down, I was not in New York. I was in a baby carriage. I was 4 or 5 months old, right? But it sounds very similar to the attack we were about to do on Afghanistan to unlodge the Taliban and fight Al-Qaeda, where our plan was go in there, fuck them up. And there was only one congressperson pushing against it. It was Barbara Lee saying, but what's the plan? What's the follow-up? And we have yet to hear that from Netanyahu's government. And lastly,
we actually have it. We have it.
So when did that come out? What was the follow-up?
I'm pretty sure, if I'm not wrong, but this was 2 weeks ago or so. But the plan was to rearrange the border and to make it significantly wider, including underground, to establish a demilitarized zone that is significantly larger with complete control, and to take control of Gaza, eliminate all Hamas elements, and install a controlled government or something along those lines.
Install a controlled government.
Install a replacement government. I know it sounds like this is going to last a long time and it's going to be painful, but that's I think what they announced.
Okay.
I think they should get out. I'm not going to call for a ceasefire until all the hostages are released. That's just my position here.
I guess so. For me, I have yet to see a well thought out plan that looks like it could be successful for managing the occupation afterwards, or how that occupation exactly would go. Maybe I missed it. You could send me the resources on that. I'd appreciate to see it, but I've yet to see all of the details. But lastly, I very much believe that one of the things that could end up being being the end of America's influence on the global stage, or something that could undermine America's influence on the world stage and bring about the kind of, wet dream of the multipolar crowd, is continued hypocrisy when it comes to international law and when it comes to the international rule-based order, which we're supposedly defending in Ukraine. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, I heard and I agreed with the idea that they were violating international law. They were violating an agreement they agreed upon in 1994, that they would respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, and that it was completely legal and right for us to support them. It was our weapon shipments were illegal, completely inbound with the international norms that have been set after the end of World War II and after the end of the Cold War. But I am getting a vibe from people who were maybe, on the fence about supporting Ukraine, but didn't know, where they feel that this instance of us coming out and sending weapons over to Israel, even though Israel is still in continuation in violation of international law through its occupation of the West Bank, that are standards for making sure that people have a country, that they can run themselves, that people are not created stateless or displaced en masse, and they're able to rule themselves within the bounds of international law, that we're being hypocritical on it. And that one of the main critiques of the American-led system is the hypocrisy of the American-led system. We want to hold Vladimir Putin to the rules of the International Criminal Court for kidnapping 19.5 thousand Ukrainian children, it's a horrific crime, while we won't hold our own soldiers to the standards of the International Criminal Court for crimes that they could have committed in Afghanistan. And so I don't want to compromise on the standards of international law when it comes to supporting Israel. And if Israel wants American weapons, that they should come within the bounds of international law and agree that we will not continue the cycle of violence. I hear from all the times, everyone, that the war in Ukraine is an endless war after 2 years. We've been sending weapons to Israel for a very long time. The conflict between Israel and Hamas, or the PLO, or Fatah, or the Fedayeen have been going on much longer than the recent wave of violence between between Russia and Ukraine. Yet that is the war that's called endless. And so if we're going to start devoting more weapons into a war and conflict that's been going on much longer than the one in Ukraine, we need to see some real commitments to ending that cycle of violence before I'm going to contribute more resources into it, like whatsoever.
I want to just put in a little fact checker thing on you before continuing. The United States is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court.
Exactly. That's my critique of it.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's hypocritical that we're asking the Russians to be held to that.
There's also a good reason why. I was a bit older, somewhat older than you. I'm a boomer when the Iraq War happened. Belgium was one of the big countries that opposed the Iraq War. A lot of people forget them for some reason. The Prime Minister at the time, Guy van Hofstadt, actually tried to sue the Bush administration, George Bush, Dick Cheney in particular, on the International Criminal Court, and built the criminal case against him for creating a war, for doing a war of aggression, an unjustifiable war of aggression. And I think people in Belgium, within the Belgian Social Democratic Party, are still collecting evidence regarding the criminality of the Iraq War. If the United States actually ever signed up to the International Criminal Court, the Belgian government, the Belgian prosecutors, who would probably still go through with this, and you'd actually see Bush in The Hague, which I don't think is very convenient for you right now.
Yeah.
It would be funny. It would be great, in my opinion. It would be justified, but that is actually something what would happen. And I think that's the reason why any conversation about joining that court system is.
I mean, he did design the Hague Invasion Act, which is a law that the Bush administration passed, which is still on the books, that states if an American soldier is captured by the International Criminal Court and put on trial, that we can deploy resources and go, like, military resources, and get them out of there. Just straight up invade the Hague, get our guy, and just skedaddle with special forces.
What the fuck? Okay.
Wow. So that being said, we have reached a natural shifting point in the conversation. The next topic is related to this. Essentially, I'm just going to read out the next thing, even though we're kind of already there. Zelensky recently called for solidarity with Israel. Is it hypocritical for Ukraine to call for international aid as the country being invaded while supporting the invasion of Gaza by Israel? And let me just read a couple of super chats here. Mrs. Apostate, thank you. Says great panel, Stardust. Nico says, Stardust, I'm listening to this while making love. Dude, why would you tell me that? Why? Okay, so I don't know. Somebody replied to my tweet about this and said, "Oh, do you think this will be good to jerk off to or whatever?" I'm like, what are you talking about? What is wrong with people? Anyways, let's start with Twisted, I guess. So yeah.
All right. On this one, is it hypocritical? No, it's not. And the reason it is not is while I support Palestine getting their own country and everything, Hamas did attack Israel first. What the IDF is doing with this massive aerial bombardment campaign is completely abhorrent. However, the military operations against Gaza are completely justified by that attack. The bombing and everything is not justified, of course, but military operations are. So no, there is no hypocrisy there, any more than it would be hypocritical for Zelensky to go into, if the Ukrainians were able to go into a border town in Russia to hit supplies for against the Russians. So no, there's no hypocrisy there whatsoever.
Okay, Rav, you want to go ahead, and then LonerBox?
Yeah, like the way I see it, Ukraine had very clear reasons not to like stand completely aligned with the Palestinians. I think there are very clear parallels you could make between the Palestinian experience and the Ukrainian experience, as far as having this big state kind of looming over you with its politics all the time. It can go. There's also a lot of things that I would expect Ukrainians, and at the civilian level I have seen it, but at the government level I would have liked to see, if not a condemnation, at least a level of solidarity with the Palestinian experience. I did not see that, but I also understand why it didn't happen. Ukraine, much like Russia, is one of the countries that has one of the biggest Jewish populations in Europe. I would expect a lot of people there to have sympathies with Israel, relatives in Israel. Zelensky himself is, among those people. Then we are also seeing that Ukraine is trying to align itself with the European Union, and it is likely going to, take stances that are parallel to the European Union in a lot of senses. I think, at the level of the civilian population, there certainly is a level of solidarity between, the Palestinians and the Ukrainians, as far as, the experience of having this state looming over you goes. At the level of the government, not so much, but I think by the end of the day, people understand that people in both societies want to live in a level of security and peace that is not being allowed because of geopolitical interests of someone else and their concerns and their impositions. And in that sense, I know that, even if a lot of these sentiments are not vocal, they exist. And, that's something that comforts me.
Okay, yeah, LonerBox.
I think as a politician who's getting invaded, Zelensky's going to have to support the country that's helping him, and Palestinians can't really help him. On a personal level, yeah, you would expect there to be a bit more empathy with especially as a country that watched parts of their own country get annexed because the imperial power had gone in and put a bunch of their goons in there a long time ago with Crimea, which is kind of what like Israel wants to do with parts of the West Bank. They want to annex parts of the West Bank and have done for quite a few years now. So yeah, you'd expect a bit more, but he's a politician who's in the middle of a war. I don't really expect him to act outside of those parameters. So yeah.
Hey, Kraut.
Netanyahu hates Zelensky. That's something that is pretty well known, I think. A lot of people know that. Yes, Netanyahu hates Zelensky, and I think Zelensky is doing his best to scratch that itch, and I hope he keeps scratching it, because I hate Netanyahu. I really hate Netanyahu, and in one point, LonerBox is correct. He has to go to the side that gives him support. It also has to be said that let's not forget that Hamas celebrated and supported the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Let's not forget that, please. And let's also not forget that Hamas already sent a delegation to Russia. It's one of the first things they did. We actually might be entering we might actually be entering a new Cold War. Where there's like an alignment now happening. Twisted wanted to disagree with me and correct me on something. So
no, I didn't want to disagree with you. I wanted to bring up a kind of a theory that I had shortly after October 7th.
Do you mind if you? Oh, sorry. Do you mind if we bring it up after we finish?
No. I'm interested in hearing, and then I can continue.
Okay, all right, fine.
I interrupt people all the time like an asshole.
Hamas, the attack on October 7th was a very well coordinated, very well planned attack. We've seen recent information come out about Wagner supporting Hezbollah and supporting Hamas. I am of the opinion that Wagner in Africa provided some training to the Hamas terrorists that conducted the attack. Yeah, it seems chintzy and all that with their paragliders and everything, but that still takes training. And there's nowhere in Gaza that you're going to do paraglider training without it being seen by the Israelis. It's not going to happen. So that had to have been done elsewhere. And with Wagner being relatively close in Africa, it would not surprise me if some of those fighters, at least maybe not the individual fighters, but a cadre got trained in Africa and then trained more within the Hamas organization. So I think there's a direct tie because Putin, this is a boon for Putin. It's a distraction from the Ukraine war, right? People are paying attention. Putin wants this. He likes this. This is good for Adolf Putin, right?
It's funny since you bring it up because Putin was a KGB agent in Dresden, in the Dresden base in East Germany. Do you guys know what the KGB did in Dresden? What the job of the KGB station in Dresden was in East Germany?
Can we finish the opening statements and then you guys can discuss this because I'm just going to
I'll just put this in. The KGB in Dresden, in the Dresden operation base of the KGB, trained German terrorists, to the Red Brigades, to commit attacks in West Germany. So it would be in the playbook of the Russian state to do shit like this. That's true, but it needs evidence. That's what I'm going to say.
Okay, Dylan, give your opening statement, and then we'll go to AP.
So Ukraine has historically, according to the Israeli government, actually been too favorable towards the Palestinians since it's declared independence. Israel's ambassador at one point said that Ukraine backs 90% of UN's anti-Israel votes. In 1999, Yasser Arafat came to Kiev and met with Kuchman. There was a number of UN resolutions that they voted in favor of, condemning the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, with its most recent vote being in November of 2022, so after the Russian invasion, where they voted in favor of a UN resolution asking the International Court of Justice to investigate the prolonged occupation of Palestinian territory. So generally speaking, if you look at the width of Ukraine's modern record on the issue of Palestine, it has been in favor of ending the occupation, been in favor of good relationship with the Palestinians. I mean, if Arafat is meeting with Kiev's president, that means that at least in some level that they're at least vibing, right? But this recent wave of violence between Russia and Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is different than what happened in 2014. In 2014, the Palestinian ambassador came out and said that they recognize the Donbass, they recognize the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Whereas in 2022, the Palestinian ambassador didn't say anything and instead said, we're going to be neutral this time. And that was a transformation on the Palestinian front that might have had an impact on the Ukrainians. Another transformation is how much the Iranians are now helping the Russians in invading Ukraine. Shahed drones is something that the Iranians have helped the Russians in manufacturing and giving them contracts for, that they have used to then terrorize Ukrainian civilians. I had one of those drones blow up, I think, 50 feet from where I'm sitting right now that shook the entire house on stream. Obviously, that's not going to make me have the most favorable opinion of Iran, and that's not going to help. And that's not going to make most Ukrainians, those in the government or those civilians, have a very favorable opinion of Iran or anybody that Iran arms. And so, seeing that conflict between Iran and Ukraine wanted to capitalize on that and see if they could get some support from Israel. But the problem is Israel has basically done nothing, very little. There's been we'll give you some advice on air defense, or we'll give you a little bit of training, but there's not been a lot of military support from Israel for Ukraine, which some Israelis have been very critical of Netanyahu's government for that, especially as Iran has gotten more and more involved in helping the Russians invade Ukraine. And now that we're seeing Hamas officials in Moscow, we're seeing Hamas officials giving interviews saying, yeah, we have contracts with the Russian government to make Kalashnikovs. I don't believe that, but they are saying that on Russian state TV. Now that we're seeing more cooperation between the Russians, Hamas, and Iran, the Israeli public opinion is turning more and more against Netanyahu's stance, which has been basically snubbing Zelensky. And Zelensky, according to a report yesterday that was leaked, that really pissed off Zelensky that it was leaked, he's going to be visiting Israel in the next week, where before at the start of the war, they stubbed him. They said, we don't want your support. But then after Netanyahu's popularity tanked and Biden's speech actually was received pretty well by Israelis, I think he might have changed his tone a little bit. I just wanted to give some general context to the situation because I feel like people don't have a lot of context. So I think Ukraine's position on Palestine has not been as clearly documented as in comparison to what recently happened. And I don't want to take up too much time. I have more things to say, but I just wanted to give that context.
Thank you.
Okay, AP.
I'm just going to give my brief opinion on this, and then I'm actually going to go and I'll let you guys discuss this part.
Thanks for joining, by the way. So, yeah.
Thank you for inviting. I'll be happy to be here every single day. So one issue is the whole political aspect, right? The political aspect is that there is this what is now called the axis of resistance, which is the Iranian proxies in the Middle East, Syria. They are allies with Iran, with Russia, and all of that. From a whole political standpoint, Zelensky would be on the opposing side of that whole group, of that whole party. The very people who it seems are orchestrating the Hamas attack on Israel behind the scenes are also in charge of attacking and bombing, as many of you have pointed out, Ukraine. So therefore, it's completely politically expected, I would say, of Zelensky to support Israel. Then there are other issues, such as that Ukrainians generally view Israel favorably. There was a poll at the beginning of this year, actually long before any of this started, according to which the majority of Ukrainians consider Israel a friendly country, and in comparison, for example, nobody considers Iran a friendly country. There's like 1% or so say Iran is a friendly country. So there's a big contrast, and going with what your culture in general says, where your culture stands, is probably an expected outcome of the situation. And the other issue is it hypocrisy? I don't believe it's hypocrisy at all. Ukraine was invaded, Ukraine was attacked, Israel was also attacked and responded. And when it comes to the whole territorial issue and being against the big guy who breathes down your neck or who threatens you all the time, I think Israel fighting with these separatist terrorist groups can be more compared to Ukraine fighting with Russian separatist groups backed by Russia inside Ukrainian territory. So I think Zelensky could much more relate to Israel in this situation than to the Palestinian side. So I don't think that there's any hypocrisy at play here. But feel free, everybody, to discuss.
I
just leave.
I hate to jump straight back.
I don't think that analogy made any sense, but sorry.
Let's all say goodbye.
Yeah, before
Bye-bye.
don't wanna jump.
Thank you for coming. Yeah,
you can all blast me. You can blast me after I'm gone. I'm leaving.
No.
Okay?
We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Just kidding.
Everybody go check out AP's channel. I'll link it in the YouTube and in the Twitch. Okay.
Yeah,
So
thanks.
thank you so much.
See ya.
Yeah.
So
Take care.
I want to reiterate what he said slightly, and then I want to disagree with what he said. So the one thing I want to reiterate is that the conditions that created what's happening right now in Ukraine, the conditions what created what happened right now in Gaza Strip is very different. There was no big terror attack where Ukrainians flew over the border and started randomly mowing down Russian civilians, as much as the Russian government wished something like that would happen so they would have an excuse. That's why they were making up shit about weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons that were going to target the DNA of Russian-speaking peoples. It's because they didn't have a casus belli, so they had to create one. Whereas the casus belli to invade Gaza is very clear. It was the terror attack that happened. I also think that there's a difference between Ukraine is an internationally recognized state that currently exists and has defined borders, whereas while there is agreements about what the state of Palestine should look like, they do not have a self-governing united country. And so there's like different conditions that are that I'd say make it separate, make it very separate. But I would say that the main difference between what he just said with the fighting the Russian rebels is that the vast majority of UN member states recognize Palestine, recognize that there should be a Palestinian state, that the Palestinian people should not be endlessly stateless. If the people of eastern Ukraine wanted it to be part of a Russian state, they could go to one. They could go to an internationally defined Russian state. They could live there. They could go there, speak Russian, go eat as much Russian food as they wanted. Whereas with Palestine, that same condition does not exist. So there's a difference there when it comes to ongoing occupation. There is no ongoing occupation of the Russian people.
I wanted to point out something, add a bit more context in here, which I think it's often forgotten because people ignore Eastern European politics a lot. Unfortunately, it's something that I complain a lot about in my videos. So, I just a little context in here for all of you. When communism came to an end in Eastern Europe and the Soviet bloc collapsed, right, there was a lot of aggressive movements, in particular, for example, like the Polish government in exile, that demanded that once communism ends, Poland should have territorial claims over Belarus and Lithuania, right? There were like territorial squabbles from before the Second World War that there were movements that were trying to dig them up. But there were also others who thankfully became more prominent in the political discourse, like the Polish political scientist Jerzy Giedroyc or the Ukrainian political leader Ivan Drak, who argued a position which is basically summarized: the state is more important than the nation, that the creation of a state for our people is more important than unifying a nation, unifying a people or a historical claim or ethnicity under a nation, right? Creating states is more important, and therefore we should rescind all historical claims to territory, and we should accept our new borders and demand the creation of a state. And also very important, this is something that Jerzy Giedroyc underlined a lot, which is the purpose of politics in the present should be the future. We do politics now because we want to build a future. The purpose of politics should not be the past. We should not do politics for the purpose of digging up and creating some sort of idealized version of the past, right? And because of this attitude that was very present and predominant in the state building projects in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, later Czechia and Slovakia, Ukraine, Lithuania and co, when communism died, that state building process, that idea of the importance of having a state over having a nation, is why all the post-Soviet states immediately recognized Palestinian statehood. That was a guiding principle of Eastern European foreign policy, and to a degree still is to this day, which is reject any and all statelessness. No people should become stateless. We must reject statelessness. And on that principle alone, we have to recognize both the Israeli state and the Palestinian state. That was a foreign policy. And the context that I want to deprive is that principle of foreign policy in Eastern Europe is starting to erode. And I'm kind of sad about this. we see, for example, in Polish politics, we have a new right that emphasizes the importance of Polish nationhood over just there being just a Polish state, right? We are seeing the consensus of opposition to statelessness, or that the state should be the priority over the nation, erode. And that is what you're kind of seeing there. You're seeing Eastern Europe, which for a very long time had a very principled stance for the last 30 years of being, there should be a Palestinian and Israeli state, erode and become more sympathetic to Israel. And that's the context I wanted to provide. You can think about that what you want. I think, I believe in the two-state solution. I believe there is a lot of hypocrisy how we in the West act towards this. I think, for example, every country that doesn't recognize Palestine should provide citizenship to Palestinians on principle. If you don't recognize a Palestinian state, what are you going to do with the, how many million are there? 6 million stateless people. You can't, I'm just generally opposed to any and all statelessness. You should provide them citizenship. There should be more principled stances. And I have to say also about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I have raged about Netanyahu here for a while. I'm generally more pro-Israel, but I am capable of recognizing when both sides of a conflict are bad. And in this case, I really have to reiterate that neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians have in recent decades shown any kind of willingness to advance any sort of peaceful resolution of this conflict. Nobody here has the moral high ground. That's, yeah. Go ahead. Did I stump you? Nothing to add.
I
wanted to add something, but it has nothing to do with what you said. Shit.
Yeah, if you want to say,
there's something.
It has been like 2 hours. I usually try to let everybody. If you guys need to go somewhere, feel free to go.
I
If you want
just
to stay,
woke
feel
up.
free to stay. Okay,
I could be here for
saying,
hours.
just letting people know. I don't want people to feel like they're obligated to be
I'm
here.
here
if
at
they
your
don't wanna be
leisure.
here, okay?
No.
Okay.
I can be here for a bit more. Yeah.
Okay. Also, chat, if you would like to call in, please join the lobby in the Discord. So that's it. Sorry.
I will say that, like, seeing people in Ukraine get so opinionated so quickly on the war between Israel and Hamas is very strange, because I'm seeing people who never had an opinion before on this. Like a month ago, they couldn't even point it out on a map, or all of a sudden, like, we need to raise Gaza to the ground. It's like, what the fuck? What happened to you? Like, you just found out, and now you have the most, like, bloodthirsty opinion ever. And that's not true amongst all Ukrainians. There are pro-Palestinian Ukrainians, but it really does feel like, at least in this country specifically, the most hypocrisy I'm finding about this war is on an interpersonal level. With Ukrainians who for whatever reason are unable to connect their own experience with occupation or their own experience with forced displacement to what's happening in Ukraine and Israel, either due to not Ukraine, Israel, with Palestine and Israel, either due to personal it's just not clicking, or the media they consume, or for whatever reason. But this isn't just a Ukraine issue. That's an issue everywhere.
Dylan, how much of that do you think is due to the ties that have come out between Hamas and Russia?
That's a significant contributor. It's the same thing what happened with Armenia and Azerbaijan, where a lot of people I met here kind of just by default supported Azerbaijan because the Armenians were in a Russian military alliance that didn't really mean anything. At the end of the day, it looked like the Russians didn't do shit, but they were supposedly within a Russian military alliance, and the Ukrainians looked at it kind of like, well, you trusted the Russians. What did you expect? Also, that is internationally defined as Azerbaijani territory, just like the Donbass is internationally defined as Ukrainian territory. And that's where the analysis stops and ends. Now, I'm not saying that there's no justification at all to their opinions. I'm just saying that a lot of times people will, through the prism of opposing Russia, kind of put other concerns to the side.
I just wanted to interject something, because someone in the chat while I was talking was like, oh, the Palestinians can just go to Egypt. Oh, the Palestinians can just go to Jordan. I see this thrown around so much that I want to sort of get to this. I don't know how many of you read like a lot of geopolitics authors, but I can tell you something that there's a lot of worry right now about Egypt. And the reason why there's a lot of worry about Egypt is Egypt 10 years ago outpaced its ability to feed its own population. Its population is so huge it can't feed it anymore. It can't sustain it by its own means anymore. Egypt is entirely dependent on food imports to avoid a famine, and Egypt is on the verge of fucking food instability. There's a lot of worry among a lot of geopolitical analysts that if the population of Egypt increases by, I don't know, 1 million or 2 million, that you're going to have an Egyptian famine. And if the food trade networks around the world, if food exports and imports collapse, there will be an Egyptian famine. I guarantee you, if you shove 2 million Palestinians from Gaza into Egypt, you will have that famine. You will have that famine. And that's not something that I think you should be advocating. The other thing that is often forgotten in this debate is when Palestinians go to Arab countries, they're treated like shit. They're literally treated like shit. All the Arab countries like to go like how much solidarity they have with Palestinians, etc. Look at how the Jordanians treated the Palestinians.
Yes.
Look at how the Lebanese treated them. Look at how the Kuwaitis.
Still, yeah.
Yeah,
I would like to
like
add something. I would like to add something important to that. You know, Palestinians are some of the most educated people in the Middle East. They're some of the most educated people in the world. There is a very big Palestinian IT sector, and Palestinians generally are, you know, very competent when it comes to things that have to do with computers. In recent years, and this is something that I omitted of my video in Israel and Palestine, but it was part of the research. We've seen Jordanians, you know, Palestinians living in Jordan, that have emigrated from Jordan to the West Bank because job opportunities are better and because they prefer the treatment they would get there than the deal that they get in Jordan. So, you know, it does get to this point where even some Palestinians, you know, would prefer the treatment given to them by the Israelis, the kind of oppression of the West Bank, than to continue to live in Jordan. And, you know, that's very concerning. It does not speak well of, you know, this like pan-Arab solidarity that we like to imagine that exists sometimes. And, you know, to Dylan, there's something I would like to point out in as far as, you know, the kind of support that I guess Palestine could be receiving from Ukraine. We recently saw that the Irish government took a very strong position, you know, in regards to Palestine. Well, what I would like to kind of indicate there is that, you know, even though Ukraine is a state, it could be responding to very strategic concerns as far as, you know, responding to the attack on another state goes, and then, you know, that being a safe call to make. We've seen internationally recognized governments of that same sort, for example, the Irish government, take a very pro-Palestine stance. The Irish decided to say that, you know, we are going to be making the case that the Palestinians are, you know, the transgressed party in this situation and such and such. And I think they did that in the grounds of their own kind of, you know, experience with oppression from a foreign power that I imagine the Ukrainian government could also have, you know, kind of resonated with. But again, I say this kind of underlying that I understand why the Ukrainians prefer to side with Israel in these circumstances. So
maybe if Russia collapses, we can give the Palestinians Kaliningrad. That would be like a funny reversal of things.
Yeah.
Palestinian Zionism.
State in Europe.
Oh yeah, it'll be like Palestinian Zionism.
So I'm going to drag in a couple of people, but before I drag them in, I'll throw the fourth one in here because I thought it was interesting. U.S. officials stated that intelligence indicates that Wagner plans to give Iranian-backed Lebanese Hezbollah Russian Pantsir S-1 air defense missile systems. Russia and Iran have recently increased their military technical ties. Iran has provided Russia with Shahed 136, 131 drones and domestic Shahed production capabilities. And Russia reportedly provided Iran with advanced surveillance software and cyber weapons and promised Iran Su-35 aircraft. I hope I'm saying these right. Do you anticipate Wagner getting further involved in the Israel-Hamas war? How do you think that this will affect the war in Ukraine as well as Israel? I'll just leave that open to anybody else.
Yes.
I think in the build up to
go back to what I said about Wagner initially. I'm not saying that there was necessarily a direct tie there, but I think some, at least funding, some level of training and support came from Russia through Wagner to Hamas. This is nothing but positive for Russia. This is a play. This is a play right out of the book for Putin to do this, to distract, to pull eyes away from what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I don't think they need to be that coordinated. It's like, I know that not long before.
A coordinated attack. This was from a military tactical standpoint. This was a very coordinated attack. This was not a fly by night bunch of ragtag people that decided we're going to go across the border and do terrorism. Right.
I think without going into the conjecture, because we don't know who else was involved in it yet, but we do know that not long before October 7th, like there was a $100 million cash transfer that went to Islamic Jihad that came from a Moscow-based crypto exchange. So I don't feel like they need to plan an attack altogether. Like I think the financial exchanges just seem to be enough. There's plenty of reasons that Hamas exceeded expectations on the battlefield. You know, that they don't have much. They don't necessarily have to do with other countries planning it with them.
But there you go again. $100 million from Moscow again. Russian tie.
I think Russia now has a interest in further destabilizing the world, and in particular the Western world. And I think though that when we talk about geopolitics, like my main thing that I'm interested in is institutional economics. I believe that internal developments are always more important than geopolitical developments, that the geopolitical is written by the internal, not the other way around. That geopolitics doesn't have that big an impact on the internal. So before we even continue the conversation about the geopolitical, I think it is far more important to point out, especially in regard to Israel Palestine, that it is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that is at the core of this. It is the resolving of that conflict that is more important than talking about the involvement of even the Russians or the Iranians. The emphasis should be always be on the resolving of that conflict.
Yeah,
that's just my
I mean, the main way to undermine Russian plans would be just, you know, avoiding a regional war, bringing this conflict to a cease, to stop as soon as possible. That would be the best way to undermine Russian plans to use the region in order to try to bring America's attention away from Ukraine. Which, I mean, if people want an idea of how that would work, the most direct thing that would probably be impacted would be artillery supplies, considering if there was a regional war, the Israelis would need artillery, and we produce a lot of 155 millimeter shells that Ukraine desperately needs right now. I just got back from an artillery embed of American howitzer crews, as in they're operating American howitzers using American provide shells. And we've already taken 10,000 shells that was originally going to go to Ukraine, and we've already sent them to Israel. And so if this became a regional war, this is something that could drag out, where we're sending more and more resources originally allocated for Ukraine to Israel, unless we end up allocating more resources overall, like Biden has said, for both conflicts. But if it becomes regional, how long can we support both at length without political backlash, without domestic political backlash?
On top of that,
but I never got to comment on Wagner.
Go ahead.
So as for Wagner, I don't know if you guys know this, but the head of Wagner is now Prigozhin's son. You know how crazy that is?
Yes.
They murder Prigozhin, and then they give his job to his child, with his child almost certainly knowing that, like, I don't want to end up like Papa. This is like some old like Roman Empire like type of like just evil sadistic politics. But as for them operating in the region, Wagner's main, I think most people know Wagner from the war in Ukraine, but Wagner operated way before the war, before the 2022 war in Ukraine. They were known to have been operating in Ukraine before, during 2014, but they were a lot more low key. They have been operating throughout Africa, through the Central African Republic, through Sudan, through Libya, through all sorts of countries, running guns and weapons for different groups that align with Russia's interests, or groups that could possibly form an alliance with Russia down the line. Like the Central African Republic is heavily reliant on Wagner security forces, even though the war in Ukraine has strained it, and Russia has had to pull back their soldiers from forward operating positions because they need them for the war in the home front. But I think Wagner is returning back to what it has done before the 2022 invasion, and that is asymmetrical warfare as a mercenary group to do the dirty work of the Russian Empire through a subsidiary, which is Wagner. So Russia doesn't have to get their soldiers, their officially contracted soldiers, doing the dirty work for them. If you're going to have a bunch of people smashing Syrians' heads in with sledgehammers, you don't want that to be a Russian soldier. You want it to be a mercenary, part of a contracting group that, you don't know what that contracting group is. Is that the Russian government? Is that not the Russian government? So I think that this seems to be within their purview. This does seem like something that Russia would do, and their interests do align with it. So yeah, it does not sound wild, the idea of Wagner helping Hezbollah. I think they'd probably help Hezbollah before they'd help Hamas, though. It'd be easier too.
Yeah, I would like to say that to the extent.
Going back to the two things. That's where I was coming from on the Wagner helping with plan the October 7th, or at least supplying equipment or whatnot, right? Because they are operating in Africa, which is pretty nearby, not far to haul equipment or training. But going to the artillery shells, it not only what you said, Dylan, but we pulled stocks from the pre-positioning stockpile in Israel that we have an agreement with the Israelis that they were to be allowed to access in time of conflict. It's pre-positioning for American forces, but the Israelis were allowed to use it. We pulled a ton of shells out of there to send to Ukraine. So not only is there the question of supplying Israel and Ukraine with artillery, we have already depleted the stocks in Israel that we have an agreement that we need to fill those stocks up. So it becomes a big issue.
Did any of the caller-ins want to say anything? Oh, Rav, why don't you go?
I just have one thing to say on this topic. It's that, for Wagner to do any kind of involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict successfully, they would need to divest from their current positions in Russia. And I don't think they will, because Russia needs every person it can on the ground right now. If they get to this point where they start sending people to the regions, to the rest of the empire. Right now, the border with Kazakhstan is completely unprotected. It's gotten to this point where they're concentrating all of their troops on the offensive, and taking people away from there might be very stupid for them to do, especially right now. I don't think that Wagner will get involved, at least in a significant degree, in this conflict.
Well,
and
Wagner's
in that
not
sense,
involved
I think
on the Wagner at this point has been pulled out of Ukraine. They're not functioning in Ukraine. They're they're still there, but they're not really there, right? But what Dylan said is accurate. They are going back to their old playbook of guerrilla and asymmetric warfare in regions that are not Ukraine. So the Russians are, they have one, if there's one thing they have, that's meat to throw into the grinder. And a few, 5,000-10,000 Wagner soldiers are not going to make much of a difference when they can just conscript another 100,000, right? So
maybe, but soon those numbers are going to be important. That's
the Russian version of Amazon is now hiring prisoners to do work. They shoved out their work of sorting the parcels and all that to prisoners. Bakeries in Russia have run out of people to work in bakeries because so many people have been sent to the front line.
I think the casualty count is up to 300 and something thousand.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken. Am I right on that?
The Ukrainian government says it's 300,000, but I think that is actually low. I think the Russians might actually be at 350,000 casualties.
Not
because if you look at the footage, they're just wasting people on a rate that is just, it's the movies of sending human waves into machine gun fire. It's insane. They're just throwing people into the trash.
That's the Russian tactic, is to bombard with artillery and then send your waves of soldiers, and that was the old
in the
Soviet
Avdiivka
tactics.
offensive, because
they lost
people in the audience may
Avdiivka.
know this, which is while we were all distracted with Hamas and Israel and Gaza, the Russians tried an offensive in Avdiivka. The most stupid thing I've ever seen. They drove their own tanks through their own minefield, and then got semi-encircled and had to retreat back through their own minefield. And they lost a year's worth of armored vehicles and tanks in production terms. The Russians are just doing one stupid thing after another. And as people are distracted and thinking, oh, the Ukraine war, Dylan said this earlier, how stupid it is that people say that this is a forever war. It's not a forever war, and it's not going good for Russia. Yeah, the counteroffensive failed, and you have to keep in mind, the Ukrainians admitted to that. They said, yeah, our counteroffensive fails. But in war, not everything always works, and the fact that they're able to admit to it is very telling. It's actually a positive.
I blame for the counteroffensive failing is the West.
Us. Yeah.
We should have supplied Ukraine with instead of trickling the support in, we should have supplied them with the Abrams, the Attackams, gotten them trained on the 16s.
I wish John McCain was president right now.
Jesus.
That's what I'm
No, fuck that.
If they would have had Attackams and F-16s to provide close air support during this counteroffensive, holy shit. Russians would be crying right now.
When it comes to the Western support, I wish John McCain was alive and president right now when it comes to Ukraine.
The two people who... Okay, go ahead, Dylan.
I do wish that we sent a lot of our support faster and sooner towards the end of last year, so that by the time the beginning of this year came around, they would have more armor and more artillery and more reserves to throw at the Russian lines. It would be helpful. But first thing I want to throw out there is a lot of Western governments, even at the end of 2022, did not really understand or truly believe in the stability of the Ukrainian government, or they believe that it would probably be stable. But believing something that will probably be stable and trusting them to be stable enough to give them hundreds of tanks, hundreds of artillery guns, hundreds of pieces of heavy equipment that would be extremely embarrassing if the Russians just paraded it around the countryside or in some parade if they were able to capture it. That was one of the concerns on Western officials' minds. I think by the end of 2022, that concern should have been largely disregarded. I think maybe in March or April, it would have made more sense, considering we still didn't know how everything was going to play out. As for why the counteroffensive did not succeed, it is partially due to us not contributing the necessary amount of resources to make it succeed. If you don't have the tools to do the job, then you're not going to be able to get the job done. They didn't have the mine clearing vehicles. They didn't have the Attackams. They didn't have air superiority or even air parity with the Russians near the front line. There was a bunch of things that could have assisted them that maybe could have made the outcome be different. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been any successes from the recent counteroffensive or from recent military operations. The Black Sea Fleet is a wreck of its former self and has been reliably cucked by the Ukrainians. Russian counter-battery fire has been more effectively targeted. That is another victory. The Russians right now, in 3 weeks, have lost what Ukrainians have lost in 6 months of counteroffensives in Avdiivka from their, I don't want to call it suicidal attacks, possibly more. At this point, it should be more, but they have contributed a lot to trying to take it. They might be able to if they keep suiciding at it, but is it worth it? Probably not. Anyway.
I saw a stat that the Ukrainians are actually firing more artillery shells per day now than the Russians are.
But when it comes to the start of the counteroffensive, it isn't just like Western hubris that caused it to be a failure. Some of it was the failure of Ukrainian command. The Ukrainian commanders did not coordinate artillery strikes with the initial offensive very well. An example would be the opening salvo of the counteroffensive was 3 hours before the first ground attack with armor, where they tried to penetrate the front line as the Americans had advised them. Obviously, that gives them 3 hours to recuperate, recover, and prepare for the attack, which it should have been bombardment, immediately the armor pushes, because people should be dazed and recovering and trying to figure out what's going on, and then turn up and see the tank, not have to wait 3 hours before the assault begins. So I do want to just say that It wasn't just an issue of Western aid shipments, even though that was a contributing factor. It was also a problem of Ukrainian command still trying to adapt with extremely well dug in Russian defenses, which the more time they held off, the more time the Russians had to build up their defensives in the south.
Get back to Israel.
If the Russians are good at anything, it's conducting a defensive war.
I do want to give
before we can.
I want to cut in.
Can we
cut in real quick? Yeah, I want to give Benzo and David a chance to speak here. So yeah, go ahead. Guys.
Yeah, sure.
So can I go first?
Okay, yeah, David, you go first, and then Benzo.
So I know this is just a joke from Dylan, but I find it to be a very common sentiment, where like the idea of what Zionism is just like taken over by just being replacement for like imperialism. So like when the joke was that Palestinians would move to Russia, it was considered to be a equivalent of what Zionism is. And like I want to ask Dylan what he thinks Zionism is.
Zionism is whatever the people on Twitter hate the most and will get me the most likes. Zionism. I mean, I can't give. I'm not like Herzl. I can't give you like the Theodor Herzl definition. But Zionism, as far as I understand it, is the idea that the Jews deserve a state. That doesn't necessarily need to be in what is now Israel. I know early Zionists talked about Uganda. They talked about other locations. But it's the idea that the Jews deserve a state. That all Jews believe that. They were anti-Zionist Jews at the time who were against the creation of a state, against the idea of the creation of a state of Israel, who thought it was against the teachings of the Torah. That's the basic idea of it, is the idea that the Jews deserve to have a Jewish state.
It mostly refers to the idea that Jews have the right to reestablish the state of Israel. And it is, I would ask you, do you believe that the Jewish people have a cultural and tie and connection that's unlike just a random group of people that just randomly migrate to a place? So like Uganda and other places would not be the same thing as Jews moving back towards Israel.
I think that is irrelevant. I think that's completely irrelevant at this point. Like I hate the people who have who push this narrative of this entire debate of like, the Jews were there 2,000 years ago, and then other people coming in and saying no, the Arabs and no this.
No, I don't think that matters.
No. I think it doesn't. To end my point, I think it doesn't matter because we've now been here for 60, 70 years. Half the Israeli population are Arab Jews who were kicked out of Arab countries. People always overlook that and forget that, but I think that is really important. And it's also important. We have now 60 years. We have people who were born there, raised there, grew up there. There's an entirely new society there. There is a society there. You can't just demand the annihilation of a society because of some decades-old claims. We have a reality that we have to confront, and whether or not the 2,000-year-old claim stands true is irrelevant to me. The Israeli state exists, should continue to exist. Anyone who claims that it should cease to exist and that the Israelis should be deported or murdered is just a genocidal maniac. But at the same hand, I'll have to say that the Palestinians also have a right to finally get pulled out of statelessness.
I agree with that. The Palestinians also have a right for being on that land and for creating a status and a
People always say this weird thing of like the Israeli state has no right to exist, or the Palestinian state has no right to exist. I find that funny because if you come from that from a perspective of political science, right? No state has a right to exist.
Yeah, exactly.
No state has a right to exist.
Yeah, nobody has the inherent right to a piece of land, right? Like we would never.
It's not just that. It's all political constructs. You know? Every political construct, every social contract is a matter of belief. Our political structures exist because we believe in them, right? 40 years ago, there was a construct called Yugoslavia where people believed that they were all shared together as a group in this socialist experiments, and then people stopped believing in it. If you want to erode a political construct, right? You have to erode people's belief in it. You have to supplant their belief with something else. And the fact of the matter is there are 7 million Israelis who believe that they live in a state, who believe in their society, who believe in their social contract, right?
Can I explain why
You
I
can't
think
undermine that.
So I think the problem is there's a big movement of the idea of the importance of colonization and decolonization and
Fuck those people.
whatnot. Yeah, but it's becoming a big discourse, and I think while that is a huge discourse in society, if you completely allow the narrative that that it's like a random group of people that decided they wanted a land grab, that allows them to have justifications to dehumanize those people. So long as that is a broad narrative that's held by a large group of people on the left.
I'm not going to
That's
listen
why.
to
I would
these
have to say
people
something
anymore.
important.
That explains the difference in the intent of the people doing it. But like, just because the settlers, say in the West Bank, even the ones who go to Hebron for like religious reasons and all that, like just because they have a cultural tie to the land doesn't mean that what they're doing is not a form of settler colonialism. No, would you say
I
it's
would
not?
say that is, but there's a difference in how you acquire the land and how you I would say that no matter what kind of tie you have, it would never be. It's about the means of acquiring the land, not about the going and being part of that land.
Yeah, but so you know that. Yeah, but obviously,
I don't think I understand your question.
to a Palestinian, it's like, okay, that's great that you've got this cultural tie to this land, but my tie to this land is that I've lived here. You know,
Here's something I would like to.
I think that's the strongest tie that overrides all other ties.
We'll go to Rav, and then after Rav, I want to let Benzo get in here as well. So
you would have to also say that tie is now given to every single Israeli that lives there to to an even higher degree than those who are displaced.
Okay, you fuckers, I saw that comment. Maybe you should participate in the discussion, Dylan. I have been participating. You guys just want me to talk over everybody else, okay? I've been participating much more than that other panel. You guys just want me to yell over everybody.
Ties between, Israel and colonialism. Zionism was conceived at a time when population transfers were not considered like a super controversial thing. Right now we consider population transfer a form of genocide, but in the 1890s, 1900s, when Zionism was being articulated by Theodor Herzl and all these people, it was not considered. There's an entire Zionist political theory about the transfer, both from, Jews to the Levant, and also a Zionist political theory pertaining the transfer of the Arabs in the Levant out, and at the time it was not considered controversial. Right now we do. We also cannot exactly separate the history of, the settlement of Israel from the kind of geopolitical concerns that the British Empire had towards, reducing the influence of France in Syria, of Russia in the Caucasus and Afghanistan, because, the British Rush could no longer expand towards Afghanistan. And there were some concerns there about connecting Iraq with Transjordan. And these people also, the British had concerns about creating like a strong population belt between that little strip of land. But, that does not necessarily invalidate Israel, because if we're trying to discuss, what are the countries that have colonial pasts, every single American country has a colonial past. Australia has a colonial past. And the best thing we can do with societies of that sort is confront those things with policies of truth and reconciliation. At some point, there will need to be a commission of truth and reconciliation to make peace between, the Israelis and Palestinians in a deeply moral, deeply cultural sense. Because if not, we're going to have this permanent animosity between those societies, and that's not going to be good for either. Both people are going to continue living on the land unless something very terrible happens. And if both people continue living on the land, then in order to get along and have a naturally prosperous society, there will need to be some sort of peace, some sort of process of, coming to terms with the realities of hurt that both people have inflicted on each other. And yes, that means that Israelis will need to confront all the harm that they have done to Palestinians.
I do.
Let's move. Oh, sorry.
And I'll add in that the Palestinians also have to confront the harm they did to Israelis.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay. I'll give Dylan. Dylan, get your thing in here, and then I want to give Benzo a chance to say something. So
I do want to throw out there that when Zionism was first coming about, and when the main debates around it were just Jews debating it, because it was a inter Jewish debate mostly in the 1880s. There was not a lot of like people on like 1880s Twitter debating Zionism. It was mostly just Jews debating it with each other. And originally it was considered an extreme position. And some people even, and as I said earlier, consider it against the beliefs of the Torah. But as it's continued to develop, and as the movement grew, and as they would, they would be bolstered by pogroms and bolstered by anti-Semitism incident, like the Dreyfus affair. What was it called? The Dreyfus affair? That French artilleryman that was blamed. Yeah, sorry, I can't speak French.
It's fine.
But at that period, the Zionists were basically shopping around for where they could create their Jewish state. Most people know about Madagascar due to like the Germans and their efforts to try to possibly move Jews over there. But as I said earlier, Uganda was an idea, and people just think of it as like, oh, it was a theoretical. Not really. There were actually a lot of Jews that moved over to Uganda specifically for the intention of creating a Jewish state in Uganda. It just never fleshed out, and then they became part of the local economy till Idi Amin took over and then deported all the Jews. The economy crashed. He started eating people, and then 300,000 people died, right? But I would point to that to say that while we do recognize that the Jewish community, of course, has cultural ties to Jerusalem and has cultural ties going back thousands of years to not only the land that is currently Israel, but also other sections as the Levant as well, that doesn't mean that it was always a bygone Israel will be created right here, because they were shopping around for other options. So it does seem like even the original Zionists didn't necessarily agree that the cultural ties of the land that is currently Israel were so strong that it makes it the option for the Jewish state, because originally leading Zionists were pointing towards states like Uganda.
So I would say that wasn't really a serious.
Okay. I'm so sorry, but I have to.
Let's give a voice to Benzo.
Get here.
Yeah.
Benzo, get in here.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm from Uruguay, which is a place that already recognizes both Israeli and Palestinian as states. So it's kind of, I think the problem is the borders. It's really important right now to have clear borders, because there's no real way to kind of get a solution right now if you don't have Palestine. So I mean, Palestine is not a real country, as it doesn't have borders really. It's kind of weird, and Gaza is also kind of, is it Israeli, is it Palestinian? It's kind of weird the way it's, and I think the best solution is probably like you either have to have two states separated or three and make Gaza something different, or you have to I don't know, annihilate everyone in Gaza and start over, because it's kind of hard right now, like.
Yeah.
Okay, it's difficult, yeah, but the job of people who are trying to find a solution is to find a solution, right? We can kind of articulate that the problem is complicated over and over, and it is, but by the end of the day, I would like to believe that everyone in the region wants to live in peace and security and wants access to the ability to pursue their own happiness. The shape of the solution, at least among my Israeli and Palestinian friends, decreasingly matters compared to the existence of a solution like at all. So even though it's probably very difficult, and there are circumstances about where you would draw a border, how you would construct land transfers, which was part of the Oslo Accords and the agreements that they wanted to make at that time. Regardless of that, the necessity of a solution is important. The border is certainly something that will have to be discussed in any attempt at resolution, and we'll have to see. It's certainly complicated, yes, but there have been many attempts at resolution in the past that settled on the question of the border. You know, the border and the land transfers were not the controversial part. Typically, the things that have broken Palestinian and Israeli peace agreements are things, for example, like the right of return to Palestinians. You know, the Jews of Israel have the right to something called Aliyah, which is the process through which the Jews are allowed to go to Israel, whether they're, you know, Israeli citizens or not. They have a sponsored trip by which, you know, the Jewish state of Israel will let them go over there. Many Palestinians argue that, okay, in the case that there's a Palestinian state eventually, there should be an equivalent of Aliyah to the descendants of Palestinians that have been removed from the area. And one of the things that broke the Oslo Accords, for example, was the fact that an Aliyah for Palestinians was something that, you know, the Israelis would not allow, because they would argue we're full. There's too little space. And to some degree, they're right. You know, there's too little space in the region, but they wouldn't allow even for, you know, the legal conceptualization of that sort of agreement. But the border is not the most complicated thing, though it is a thing that would need to be negotiated. So yeah, I mean, there are reasons to be hopeful in that sense, but we do need to, you know, if we're serious about finding a solution, trying to answer as many of these questions as possible.
Yeah, but I think the problem is everyone around has to agree with the borders. So right now we have a problem with how do you say this? Like, we have to involve more countries around Israel and Palestine, because right now it's not really that good of an option if Israel is talking with the United States on some things and Palestine is talking with some other states, but really, like, everyone has to agree with borders. Like, before
in Gaza, what's in the way of peace is Hamas. In the West Bank, what's in the way of peace are the settlers, the Israeli settlers.
Can I quickly call out Dylan Burns for him being incorrect about the Uganda thing? So Theodore Herzl only called for Uganda to be a temporary safe haven for Jews during the Russian pogroms. And he's made it crystal clear that the goal that they would not affect the ultimate aim of Zionism, a Jewish entity in the land of Eretz Israel or Israel. So it was not a legitimate proposal for Uganda to be the ultimate goal of Zionism ever.
So there was never any proposals by British colonial secretaries or anyone to make Uganda the home of the Jewish people.
No, not by the Zionist leaders.
Madagascar.
Okay. I'm pretty sure. I know that Joseph Chamberlain did. Didn't Joseph Chamberlain propose Uganda?
Is Joseph Chamberlain Zionist leaders?
There were also attempts to make a state in the southern, you know, the Argentinian southern cone. Like whether the Zionists could realize their objective, that you know, was like something that was sort of an open question. The practical concerns of actually creating a Jewish state had a lot of options, because it wasn't sure, at least during the 1890s, that, you know, a state in the Levant was even an ambitious, you know, a realizable ambition. There
was a proposal to give Kaliningrad or Königsberg to the Jews after the Second World War. The one that is often overlooked is a very niche one, but that would have been a sort of a Stalinist socialist Jewish state.
Yeah, they were. Do you want to say something, Star? Do you want to say something, Star? By the way?
Let Loner go, and then I'll say something.
Okay, and then can I say something and then head out, because I've been here for 3 hours. I'm just gonna be here for an hour and a half.
Yeah. Sure. Sorry, didn't mean to take up your time.
Yeah, no, Loner, go on. Sorry, you go first.
I think one of the reasons they were also humoring Uganda was they tried to buy land in the Ottoman Empire in the late 1800s. They weren't able to. So I feel like it's not. I feel like it's quite easy to say that their preference was definitely there, right?
Israel, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So first off, I just want to say, right, for anybody trying to find a solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict, that there's this guy on Twitch Hassan, he's giving out the solutions to everyone's problems for free. All of the political and social issues of our time, he's figured them all out. He got them, he solved them, and he's going to give it to you right there on his stream. So if you want to figure it out, just tune in over there. He'll figure it out. He'll tell you the solution. But I would say for anybody who thinks that peace between Israel and Palestine is not possible, I just want to make a comparison. If you were trying to like shoot hoops into a basketball and you got really close one time, you getting really close one time seems like a good indication that it isn't impossible and might very well be possible. Whereas a lot of people might look at that once you miss and you get really close as, oh, I'll never get it. Other people, you know, maybe more glass half full type people would be like, oh man, that's an indication I can actually succeed this. Where I feel like when people look at Oslo or the times where we got really close and then like missed just barely due to like issues like right of return, the conclusion many people come to is, God, we were so close. It was the best proposal ever and it still failed. So that shows that we'll never be able to get peace. Whereas maybe I'm just more optimistic. I'm more of a half glass full type of guy. I see it and I think, wow, look how close we got. We were this close to it. This shows that it isn't unachievable. It shows that it is achievable. And we had a framework and a pathway to do it. This issue that was so complicated and everybody said was impossible and would last for thousands of years, we got that close to solving it. That's how I look at it. So I know that most people look at the conflict for obvious reasons, a very doomeristic way. But I think just a change of perspective might help people feel at least a little bit better about the future of the conflict, or the fact that it is not an impossible goal to achieve.
Morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Before you go, Dylan, will you be coming to Vienna again anytime soon?
Probably next year if I come to Vienna again, because I'm going to Scotland.
Okay, I'm going to Ukraine next year.
When are you going to Scotland?
I'm going to Scotland towards the middle of this month. Some fucking weirdo invited me over there. Some fucking freak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some freak.
Is that a fact?
Yeah. Some weirdo. He wanted to get me. He wanted to get me. I'm 22, basically a minor. Wanted to bring me to drink alcohol in place. It's really weird.
Is he also a jihadist?
I don't know. I heard he might actually be a phalangist. I don't know.
I do have one last question. And then I want to kick everybody out.
Okay.
But Dylan, if you have to leave, don't worry. I will link all of your stuff everywhere.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Yeah.